Welcome everyone to another Superhero Iceberg. Today, I'll be talking about the X-Men Iceberg. So I hope you're into that, because if you're not into that, then, well, this video, it probably isn't for you. This is going to be like 2.5 hours to 3 hours long. It's going to be a long ride for you. Anyways, I've talked about some topics related to X-Men in the past, in some other videos, so I won't be talking about these topics in this video. If you want to see me talk about these topics, go check out those videos. I've also done a ton of superhero icebergs in the past, like ones based on Superman, Spider-Man, Batman, Iron Man, Wonder Woman, etc. So if you want to go check those out after you watch this video, then go ahead, I'm not going to stop you. I've also got some other icebergs based on like Call of Duty, Godzilla, Gundam, Alien and Predator, Jurassic Park, TMNT, etc. So if you want to see something that's not Marvel or DC, I got you covered. And if you like the video, give it a like. Comment below about your favorite X-Men or your favorite, entry on the iceberg and stuff like that. Maybe even subscribe. I'm sorry, I really hate to be doing this, but it's like a requirement for YouTubers these days to get anywhere, so, sorry, I hate doing it too. Look, at least I'm not trying to sell you Pigpen branded mugs, okay? Anyways, let's get on with the video. The Gifted. Airing from October of 2017 to February of 2019 and lasting 2 seasons, The Gifted was the second and far less successful live-action X-Men series in the 2010s. While Legion got critical acclaim and 3 seasons, The Gifted was just kind of forgotten about almost instantly. The show takes place in an alternate version of the X-Men film series, and in this universe, the X-Men have disappeared for whatever reason, so mutants are being persecuted harder than ever. The show followed a completely original cast of characters, like Reed Strucker, Caitlin Strucker, Lauren Strucker, Andy Strucker, and Marcos Diaz. Although, there were a few comic mutants who made appearances in the show, like Blink, Thunderbird, Polaris, and the Stepford Cuckoos. Also, organizations like the Hellfire Club appeared in the show. Anyways, the show followed these characters as they were hunted down by the US government, as the Strucker kids got mutant powers. The show, overall, got decent reviews from critics and fans, but nothing crazy. Anyways, The Gifted lasted for 2 seasons before Fox canceled it due to low ratings, meaning that the show now ends on a cliffhanger that will never be followed up on. Also, the show did this thing where every episode's title had one uppercase letter. In Season 1 it was an X, and in Season 2 it was an M. So like, if the show kept going on, were they just gonna keep doing this? Like in Season 3 it would be E, and then Season 4 would be N, just like spell out X-Men? That's pretty dumb, I gotta be honest with you. Overall, The Gifted is a forgotten-about show that's really only known for being the live-action debut of a handful of X-Men characters. Deadpool's history of being delisted. Sadly, a lot of games get delisted from online stores over the years, but few games have ever been delisted twice, and even fewer games have been delisted 3 times. Deadpool the video game from 2013 is one of those few examples. Released in June 2013, Deadpool was eventually delisted from online stores in January of 2014, less than a year after launch. This was because Activision, the game's publisher, lost the rights to the Marvel IP, but in July 2015, for some reason, Deadpool was relisted on Steam, until it was eventually delisted again in November of 2017. But before that, in November of 2015, Deadpool was relisted, but this time for the PlayStation 4 and Xbox One. This was a remaster of the game, although in all honesty it was more like a port. But then, in November of 2017, just like the original Steam version, the remaster was delisted from online stores, and it still remains delisted to this day. X-Force film. In July 2013, 20th Century Fox announced that the X-Men Cinematic Universe would be receiving a film based on X-Force, with Jeff Wadlow hired to write the movie and direct. It was later revealed that the film was planned to be released in 2017, and the team's roster consisted of Deadpool, Cable, Warpath, Cannonball, Feral, and Domino. However, the film would never make its 2017 release, as the film was delayed with a new director and writer. Now the director was Drew Goddard, with Joe Carnahan and Ryan Reynolds being brought in to write the film. It was then confirmed in 2018 that the film would be rated R, and would basically serve as a spin-off to the Deadpool films. Plans were put in place to begin filming in October of 2018, but this never happened. And in March of 2019, it was officially confirmed that the X-Force film was cancelled, due to the Disney buyout of 20th Century Fox. So what was the plot of this X-Force film gonna be? Well, in regards to the Jeff Wadlow version of the film, we know that it was being pitched as the beginning of a trilogy of films that would have focused on Cable being a mentor to a group of young mutants. And by the third X-Force film, the X-Force would finally become the X-Force team from the comics, being heavily inspired by Rick Remender's version of the team. As for the more recent version of the film, we don't really know any of its plot, although we do know that Deadpool, Cable, and Domino were going to be the main characters. Ultimate Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's relationship. So the Ultimate Universe in Marvel Comics was a bit controversial, due to various creative decisions. But no decision was as controversial as when Marvel decided to reveal that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were in a relationship. This was a very weird choice that led to some really weird moments in the comics. My favorites of which is this one, where Captain America is just dumbfounded by Wasp's support for the I-worded relationship. He is just completely flabbergasted by this revelation. Then, of course, there's the most infamous scene, where Wolverine watches the brother and sister make out, while also knowing that he banged Quicksilver and Scarlet Witch's mom. Very, very insane comic. So why were Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver a couple? Like the out-of-universe explanation? Well, it seems that it was Mark Millar's idea that was eventually expanded upon and made far worse by Jeff Loeb. How did he make it worse? Well, besides flat-out confirming that they're a couple, it's also later revealed that Quicksilver's special love for his sister may come from his special love for his dead mom. Yeah, the Ultimate comics were, interesting. Very, very interesting. But none of this actually answers the question. Why did they do this storyline? Well, we don't know. Despite it being an extremely infamous storyline, nobody from Marvel has ever commented on why this story happened. This, of course, has led to speculation from fans, with the three biggest theories being it was a reference to how in early Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver appearances in the main Marvel universe, they seemed awfully close. This was an attempt at creating controversy to sell issues, or it's the author's barely disguised fetish. Once Upon a Deadpool. Once Upon a Deadpool is technically the third Deadpool film. I mean, kinda. It's a PG-13 recut of Deadpool 2 with a bunch of new scenes added in, including various scenes of Deadpool telling the story of the film to actor Fred Savage. Released in December of 2018, Once Upon a Deadpool received mixed reviews. While fans and critics liked the new scenes, the film is ultimately just a worse version of Deadpool 2. Fans were also confused as to why this cut of the film was even made, with many fans believing that it was made exclusively by Disney to see if a PG-13 Deadpool film could work. This, however, isn't true. While the acquisition of Fox was happening at this time, Disney didn't tell Fox to make this cut. Instead, the reason this film exists is because the film Alita Battle Angel was delayed until February, and Fox needed a film for December of 2018, so Once Upon a Deadpool was created. Although originally, Ryan Reynolds didn't actually want to make this film, as he felt a PG-13 Deadpool film just kinda misses the point of the character. He only agreed to do the film if the film's proceeds went to charity. So Fox agreed to donate $1 for every ticket purchased to the F Cancer charity campaign. The Insomniac leak. So I won't be showing any leaked images or videos from the leak, out of both respect for Insomniac and also for very obvious legal reasons. In December of 2023, Insomniac was hit by a ransomware attack that leaked a massive amount of upcoming projects, including Spider-Man 3 Part 1 and 2. I hope they don't... Just make Spider-Man 3, don't do the Part 1 and Part 2. A Venom game, a canceled Spider-Verse live service game, a new Ratchet & Clank game, and an X-Men game. But the game with the most leaks was Marvel's Wolverine, which, because of the leaks, we now know is targeting a 2026 release window. The game was announced in September of 2021, and we pretty much know everything about it. Like, everything. From the entire plot, the voice cast, the characters, gameplay mechanics, its ties with the Insomniac Spider-Man games, and worst of all, entire levels of the game were leaked online. And I'm not talking about just videos of the levels, I'm talking about playable levels. Like, you could actually play the game. But if you actually did this, you were hit by a DMCA. But worse than all of those leaks, personal information regarding many of Insomniac's employees were also hacked. Overall, the Insomniac leak is one of the most infamous hacks in the video game industry. And regardless of how Marvel's Wolverine turns out, this hack will always be one of the main things talked about in regards to this game. Deleted scenes. Now, every single movie out there has its fair share of deleted scenes, and the X-Men Cinematic Universe is no different. So here's 4 deleted scenes from each X-Men film. I'm only going to talk about 4 from each project because there's 13 different films I gotta talk about, so we'd be here all day if I were to talk about every single one of them. In X-Men 1, a scene where Cyclops asks Wolverine if he can follow orders, to which Wolverine tells him to just give him a costume, was cut from the film. A scene where Jean Grey demonstrates her powers to Wolverine was cut. This would lead into Cyclops and Wolverine arguing, and in this argument, Cyclops would make fun of Wolverine's bad memory. The scene of Cyclops teaching his automotive class was originally supposed to be much longer. And finally, a scene was cut involving Cyclops checking on Storm after the attack at the train station. In X2, a scene where Jean controls the X-Jets with her telekinesis, only for her to lose control, was cut from the film. A scene where Cyclops pilots a helicopter and uses it to transport Professor X to the X-Mansion was cut. There was also a scene that was cut that had Professor X and Cyclops traveling through an illusion of the abandoned X-Mansion looking for students. And finally, there was a scene that was cut where Jubilee would be seen using her powers in a museum. In X-Men 3: The Last Stand, Beast would be shown snapping the neck of an enemy mutant. The scene of the Phoenix destroying Alcatraz was originally much longer. Wolverine and Storm would battle Juggernaut at Jean Grey's house, which would result in Storm knocking out Juggernaut with her lightning. And finally, the film had 2 different final scenes that didn't make the cut. Wolverine returning to the bar from the first film, and Rogue returning to the X-Mansion, revealing that she didn't take the cure. In X-Men Origins Wolverine, a scene showing Sabretooth about to torture and kill Blob was cut. Originally, Wolverine was going to let Stryker wipe his memory so he wouldn't have to remember Kayla's betrayal. There was also going to be a scene that featured a cameo from a young Storm. And finally, the film's ending was originally going to have Wolverine drinking at a bar in Japan. In X-Men First Class, a scene where Moira and Professor X would kiss while drinking was cut. There was also a scene where Banshee would accidentally cause Professor X and Moira to become nauseous while testing his powers. A scene showing Magneto arriving in Argentina to hunt down former Axis Powers members was cut. He would see a child and their mother, which would remind him of his mother. And finally, there was an entire sequence that was cut from the film, which had Professor X make Magneto dress up as a woman to recruit Angel into the team. In The Wolverine, there was a scene in which Wolverine would battle various ninjas on motorcycles that was cut. There was also going to be a scene where an Imperial Japanese soldier would commit Avengers Endgame yourself. There was also going to be a scene in which Wolverine would hallucinate seeing Jean Grey while battling bad guys at the hotel. And most famously, the film was going to end with Yukio giving Wolverine the classic Wolverine costume. Most of these deleted scenes were added back into the film with the Unleashed extended cut. In X-Men Days of Future Past, a scene where Mystique would return to the X-Mansion and would have a very heated moment with Beast was cut. After that, she would go and destroy Cerebro. During the Sentinel attack, Wolverine would temporarily become feral and attack Beast. Right before traveling back in time, Wolverine was originally going to make out with Storm. And finally, there was going to be an entire subplot involving Magneto, Professor X, and Iceman rescuing Rogue from some Sentinels. More on that subplot in a bit. As for Deadpool, there was originally going to be a scene involving Ajax being transported out of the Raft prison. There was also going to be a cameo that was cut involving Nathan Fillion offering Deadpool a napkin. And finally, there was going to be a scene where Deadpool would be hit by a bus and wake up in a morgue. In X-Men Apocalypse, after watching his family be killed, Magneto was originally going to hold their dead bodies and sing a lullaby from earlier in the film. There was also going to be a scene where Professor X would ask Mystique to train the students in combat. There was also a scene where after testing out a new visor, Cyclops would say, "I sure hope the kids don't call me Cyclops." And most famously, an entire sequence was cut from the film in which Jubilee would be shown using her powers to let her, Cyclops, Jean, and Nightcrawler play at an arcade for free. The four would also get slush puppies, which would lead to Nightcrawler getting his first ever brain freeze. Nightcrawler would also breakdance. As for Logan, there was a scene in which Wolverine, Laura, and Professor X would be pulled over by a cop. The cop would believe that Laura was kidnapped by the pair, but then Professor X would tell the cop that they're simply on a family vacation to see Mount Rushmore. During the final battle in the forest, a kid named Jonah would use his powers to take control of a mercenary's body and make them Avengers Endgame themselves. Caliban would have actually been shown to survive his supposed death, and would be shown crawling out of the wreckage, only to then die due to his injuries. And most famously, a scene was cut from the film that involved Wolverine being asked if Sabretooth was real. As for Deadpool 2, there was going to be a scene in which Weasel stops Dopinder from telling Deadpool that David Bowie had died. There was also supposed to be more scenes of Deadpool attempting to Avengers Endgame himself, including a scene of him jumping into a lion's cage at a zoo and jumping off a skyscraper. An entire after-credits scene was cut in which Deadpool would travel back in time and debate on killing Baby Mustache Man. And finally, there was a cut scene where Russell and Juggernaut burned down a Mr. Supersize store because they couldn't find anything in Juggernaut's size. As for Dark Phoenix, the entire final act was originally different, with the final battle taking place at the United Nations. Jean was also going to fly up into space and do battle with a bunch of alien ships. One of the final scenes was going to have Professor X at Mystique's grave and give a monologue to himself about how he failed. There was originally going to be a scene in which Professor X snaps and yells at Cyclops telling him, "I don't know what to do." And finally, there was a scene that was cut that had Quicksilver signing an astronaut helmet for a kid. And finally, for the New Mutants, a scene where Sunspot explains that he's being imprisoned in the hospital is because, quote, "the richest people in Brazil can't have a mutant for a son," was cut from the film. There was also a scene in which Wolfsbane and Moonstar would sneak into Magic's room while she's in the shower. Magic would then discover them in her room and confront them. There was also supposed to be a scene in which Wolfsbane experiences a vision where people's faces emerge from the walls. And finally, there was a scene in which Sunspot nearly explodes while playing basketball with Cannonball. Avengers vs. X-Men, releasing from April to October of 2012, and written by Brian Michael Bendis, Matt Fraction, Jason Aaron, Jonathan Hickman, and Ed Brubaker, Avengers vs. X-Men is an event storyline about what else? The Avengers and X-Men going at it. Although technically the event didn't begin with Avengers vs. X-Men. It actually began with the miniseries Avengers Extinction. The story centers around the Phoenix Force heading towards Earth in order to possess Hope Summers. The Avengers want to protect her, but Cyclops is just like, "You're gonna kill her, leave." Yeah, Cyclops is under the impression that the Avengers are going to kill her, or at the very least are going to lead to her death, because Cable had recently come back in time and told him this. So the Avengers and X-Men battle it out to Utopia. Hope escapes Utopia during the fight, causing the X-Men and Avengers to stop fighting and to travel around the globe looking for her. When they eventually find her on the moon, it's too late, and the Phoenix Force is here. But Iron Man's just like, "I got this," and uses his Phoenix Buster armor to destroy the Phoenix Force. Except it doesn't work, and it splits up into multiple pieces, meaning that instead of Hope getting possessed, Cyclops, Emma Frost, Magic, Colossus, and Namor are all possessed by the Phoenix Force, becoming the Phoenix Five. And the Phoenix Five then decide to destroy the world. Just kidding, they actually decide to give out free food, water, and energy to people. But the Avengers aren't really hyped about this, because they're afraid of their unchecked powers. So they attempt to stop them. Eventually, Professor X joins the fray, as Cyclops gets crazier and crazier, absorbing everyone else's Phoenix powers, becoming the Dark Phoenix. At the end of the day, Cyclops kills Professor X, and then Hope and Scarlet Witch get rid of the Phoenix Force for good. Except, well, not for good, the Phoenix Force always comes back. Cyclops is then arrested, and Captain America forms the Uncanny Avengers. As with other events, Avengers vs. X-Men wasn't just the core series. It had various tie-in issues featured in Secret Avengers, Wolverine and the X-Men, Avengers Academy, New Avengers, etc. The story was, overall, not very popular. I mean, it sold very well, but its reception was pretty mixed, with many fans not really caring for what the story did to Cyclops, and many felt that the whole conflict was pretty forced. As of right now, the event hasn't been adapted in any form of media, although we'll probably one day see a soft adaptation of it in the MCU. X-Men Destiny. Released in September of 2011 for the PS3, Xbox 360, Nintendo DS, and Nintendo Wii, X-Men Destiny is one of the most infamous Marvel games ever made. The game allowed you to not create your own character, and instead choose to play as either one of 3 original characters, as they work together with either the X-Men or the Brotherhood of Mutants. The game advertised itself as being able to make choices throughout the story that would affect the game's ending, leading you to become either a villain or a hero. But that wasn't actually the case, as none of the choices really mattered except for the one at the end of Chapter 7, where you'd be given the choice to join the Brotherhood of Mutants or the X-Men. So, like, you could choose every single X-Men choice throughout the story, but then be like, Nah, I'm gonna be evil. But hey, as long as the gameplay's fun, then who cares about the story? Problem is, X-Men Destiny's gameplay was pretty average at best. Critics and players alike found the combat to be really simple and boring, and because of this, the game received very mediocre reviews. Dennis Dynack, the founder of Silicon Knights, the developers of the game, would later reveal that the game's budget was drastically reduced because of the recent Disney acquisition of Marvel. But that's not the full reason why the game is so infamous. X-Men Destiny was at the center of a legal battle between Silicon Knights and Epic Games, as Silicon Knights had supposedly copied thousands of lines of code from Unreal Engine 3 and removed Epic Games' copyright notice, replacing it with their own copyright in order to pretend they had actually created it. This resulted in X-Men Destiny being recalled, and its unsold copies destroyed. This would ultimately lead to Silicon Knights filing for bankruptcy in May of 2014. Should also mention here that while X-Men Destiny was at the center of this legal issue, the legal battle actually began a couple years prior to X-Men Destiny's release. So it was just part of the lawsuit, it wasn't like the only thing. The last thing that I'll mention is that shockingly, the 3 X-Men Destiny OCs that you can play as have actually made cameos in another Marvel project, Marvel Avengers Alliance in 2012. Although, by cameo, I really mean that they're just name-dropped as being mutants killed off-screen. But hey, I mean, it's something. The original Deadpool 3. In November of 2016, it was announced that not only was Deadpool 2 in production, but Deadpool 3 was being planned. Eventually, it was revealed that Deadpool 3 would actually be released after the X-Force film. But unfortunately, because of Disney's acquisition of Fox, both X-Force and Deadpool 3 were cancelled. Or X-Force was cancelled. Deadpool 3 was actually never flat out cancelled, at least publicly, with Disney CEO Bob Iger stating in December 2017 that Deadpool would be integrated into the MCU. And that's what's happening with Deadpool and Wolverine. But that film is not what the original Deadpool 3 was going to be. According to Ryan Reynolds, Deadpool 3 was originally going to be a road trip buddy comedy centered around Deadpool and Wolverine trying to save Christmas, with the film's plot being inspired by the 1950 film Rashomon. So while Deadpool 3 was always going to have Wolverine in it, it wasn't originally going to be a multiverse story. The Rogue Cut. I briefly mentioned it earlier, but originally, Days of Future Past was going to have a subplot about Rogue being rescued from some Sentinels by Professor X, Magneto, and Iceman. However, this entire subplot was cut from the film, which results in Rogue having an extremely minor cameo in the final film. This rightfully annoyed a lot of fans, and seeing how much this annoyed fans, it was decided to put the subplots back into the film, along with a few more deleted scenes, including a new after-credits scene involving Trask being locked in a cell beneath the Pentagon. Also, the Mystique sequence, where she returns to the X-Mansion, was also added back into the film. This version of the film overall added 17 minutes of new footage, and was called The Rogue Cut. And since its release in July of 2015, it's been regarded as the definitive version of the film. Skrulls in Dark Phoenix. So you know those aliens in Dark Phoenix? The ones led by Vuk? Well, these aliens are known as the Dabari in the film. The Dabari are an alien race from the comics who had their star system destroyed by the Phoenix during the Dark Phoenix saga. However, the aliens in Dark Phoenix weren't originally supposed to be the Dabari. As confirmed by Ty Sheridan, Cyclops' actor, the original plan for these aliens was that they were going to be Skrulls, and that Vuk would have been the Skrull Queen instead of, well, Vuk. This was changed during production, most likely to avoid any legal issues with Marvel and Disney, as Fox didn't actually own the rights to the Skrulls. But after the Skrull change, the Dabari were then supposed to be the Shi'ar, a completely different alien race from the comics. This would have led to Vuk being known as Naromani. This actually made it into filming, but was removed because director Simon Kinberg believed that this would take away focus from the main cast of characters. Old Man Logan. Old Man Logan is an 8-issue storyline that ran from June 2008 to September 2009. Written by Mark Miller and Steve McNiven, this story takes place in a dystopian America. After Mysterio tricks Wolverine into wiping out most of the X-Men, America soon falls, as the world's villains team up to take out the world's heroes. 50 years into this new era, Wolverine, now just called Logan, is forced to go on an adventure to save his family from the evil Hulk gang. These are a bunch of Hulk children born from Hulk and She-Hulk. Yeah, Bruce and Jennifer had quite the wacky relationship in this universe. Anyways, Logan works together with Hawkeye to do a job so he can get money he can use to pay the Hulk gang so that they don't kill his family. The story features a wide variety of characters, like Spider-Bitch, yes that's her name, Venom, Kingpin, President Red Skull, and more. The story comes to an end with Logan wiping out the Hulk gang and taking Hulk's youngest child as his own. He also wore an Iron Man armor for a bit, which is pretty cool. The story was an instant success, doing really well in sales and being well received. This led to the Old Man Logan universe being continued in various comics. Most notably, the Old Man Logan series released from July 2015 to December 2018, lasting 55 issues. Well, except not really. For some reason, it was decided that this Old Man Logan series was actually set in a separate universe than the original Old Man Logan storyline. So there's just two very similar Old Man Logan universes. And to make things even weirder, the Logan from this new universe jumped into the main Marvel universe for quite a while. And in the main Marvel universe, Old Man Logan fought against foes like Kraven the Hunter and Bullseye, took part in Civil War II, and even joined the main universe's X-Men. Though he would eventually return to his universe, and he would actually die in the miniseries Dead Man Logan. While this Old Man Logan universe is by far the more explored, the original universe still has popped up occasionally, such as the miniseries Old Man Hawkeye. The Old Man Logan story has been adapted, or at the very least referenced, in a variety of media, such as Marvel Heroes, Contest of Champions, and of course, the 2017 masterpiece, Logan. Although, Logan was more of a soft adaptation, Hulk didn't bang his cousin in this one. Alpha Flight. Technically, these guys aren't actually members of the X-Men, but they're very much linked to the X-Men, so I'm gonna talk about them. First appearing in the Uncanny X-Men issue 120, released in April of 1979, Alpha Flight is basically Canada's answer to the Avengers. Created by James Hudson, who would become the superhero Guardian, the team was created in order to do secret missions for the Canadian government. Originally, the team was known as Flight, and the team was kind of a failure, with one of their members dying in their first mission. Also, Wolverine was there, but he really didn't want to be there. So Hudson went back to the drawing board and created Alpha Flight. But you couldn't just join Alpha Flight. You needed to go through training in Gamma Flight. Then, you'd move into Beta Flight. And then finally, after all that training, you'd be able to join Alpha Flight. Hudson, now Guardian, led the team against a variety of different foes, like Egghead, the Great Beasts, and the supervillain copycat group, Omega Flight. Anyways, Wolverine wasn't the only mutant to be part of Alpha Flight. Northstar, Wildchild, Diamond Lil, and even Wolverine's son, Daken, were all parts of the team at some point. Alpha Flight even had Bigfoot. No, really. The actual Sasquatch was part of the team. I'm not even talking about Walker Lankowski, who was the hero Sasquatch, who was also on the team. I'm straight up talking about the real Bigfoot. Anyways, because of their introduction in an X-Men comic, and the fact they've had several mutants on the team, Alpha Flight is very much associated with the X-Men. As for their appearances in other media, Alpha Flight, or at the very least some of its more notable members, have appeared in X-Men the Animated Series, X-Men Legends 2, Rise of Apocalypse, X-Men 97, Contest of Champions, and X-Men Destiny. Mojo. First appearing in Longshot issue 3, released in July of 1985, Mojo is a disgusting creature who lives in a pocket dimension called the Mojoverse. His planet is built around television, and because of this, Mojo is obsessed with TV. Becoming the leader of his people and the planet, Mojo would eventually come into contact with Psylocke, and would give her bionic eyes, as she was blind at the time of their meeting. However, unknown to Psylocke, he didn't do this out of the kindness of his Redditor heart. Oh no. These bionic eyes were basically just cameras that recorded everything she saw, and thus began Mojo's obsession with the X-Men. He would return to mess with their lives over and over again, doing stuff like kidnapping an alternate universe version of Jubilee and turning her into his personal slave, brainwashing the X-Men into reenacting the Wizard of Oz, creating the Yellow Eye Agency so he could spy and record every mutant on the planet, and send Spider-Man and Wolverine through time in an attempt at creating a TV show about their time-traveling antics. Probably his most notable interaction with the X-Men was during the storyline Mojo Worldwide. This was a 6-issue miniseries running from October of 2017 to November of the same year. In order to make a really popular TV show, Mojo invades New York City and captures various members of the X-Men and forces them to relive key moments from their history, all while he was attempting to terraform New York City into an extension of Mojo World. As for his powers, Mojo has no spine. No, really, he literally doesn't have a spine. Not really a power, but it is pretty notable. What's also notable is his ability to generate an anti-life field that kills people and alters the weather around him, although he can only do this if he's not in the Mojoverse. He's also got the ability to mind control people, and he also knows a ton of magic. He's also got a laser gun built into his carriage that he rides around in. As for his appearances in other media, Mojo has appeared in X-Men the Animated Series, Wolverine and the X-Men, X-Men Mojo World, X-Men 97, Marvel vs. Capcom 3, and Avengers Assemble. Professor X brainwashes Wolverine into joining the X-Men. So Wolverine joined the X-Men in Giant Size X-Men issue 1, released in April of 1975. Professor X simply asks Wolverine to join, and he does. And for decades, this was the established canon, until X-Men Legacy issue 217, released in October of 2008, where it was retconned that Wolverine had actually attempted to assassinate Professor X shortly after being welcomed into the team. This was done because he was under orders from the villain Romulus, because at the time, Wolverine was still a near-feral assassin. Anyways, after stopping the assassination attempt, Professor X undoes Romulus's mental programming on Wolverine, which in turn makes Wolverine a loyal member of the X-Men. This also gives Wolverine even bigger memory problems. In fact, it's actually revealed that Professor X knew Wolverine was ordered to assassinate him when he asked him to join the X-Men. It turns out, he invited Wolverine to the team so that he could brainwash him, as he needed a weapon. Yeah, for those that aren't super well versed with the comics, Professor X he's a bit of a bastard. Although, Wolverine actually forgives him and tells him that because of this brainwashing, he turned Wolverine into a hero. What was up with the ending of Days of Future Past? So after the release of Days of Future Past in 2014, fans were a bit confused, because we see Stryker capturing Wolverine at the end of the film, only for it to then be revealed that it's actually Mystique pretending to be Stryker. So why did she do that? Well, people initially thought that this was just her being a good guy and saving Wolverine from being captured and experimented on in the Weapon X program. However, in the next film, X-Men Apocalypse, we see Wolverine being experimented on during the Weapon X program. So, did Mystique just capture Wolverine for the Weapon X program? Why would she do that if she's now a good guy? Or, at the very least, not evil? Well, it's never revealed. We can only assume that Mystique tried to save Wolverine, but somehow failed. Perhaps Wolverine being a part of the Weapon X program is simply a canon event. House of M. Releasing from June to November 2005 and written by Brian Michael Bendis, the House of M event is arguably one of the biggest Marvel events of the 2000s. As Scarlet Witch does a wacky and decides to rewrite the entirety of the world. This was because, around this time, Wanda was having a bit of problems with her mental health after she gains the powers of chaos magic. This made her very unstable, and after Wasp goofed and accidentally set off Wanda, she snapped and attacked her friends. This attack resulted in the deaths of Scott Lang Ant-Man, Hawkeye, Agatha Harkness, and Vision. In the aftermath, Wanda was kept in a comatose state by Professor X. And Professor X, being the hero that he is, then calls upon the X-Men and the remaining Avengers to discuss potentially killing Wanda, as her powers may cause the collapse of reality. Quicksilver is just like, huh? And tells Magneto about this. But Magneto responds, saying that they might actually have to kill her. So Quicksilver then races over to Wanda and convinces her to create a new reality by combining her powers with Professor X's. In this new reality, mutants are the norm, and everyday human beings are the minority who are persecuted. But this wasn't the only change. Many previously dead characters were now alive and well, including Wanda's kids. And Wanda just decides to live her life in peace as a mutant royal. That was, until a mutant named Layla Miller began to remember the original timeline, and was able to make other characters remember as well. So she began waking up people, and eventually a ton of heroes rose up and went after Wanda. Except not really. Yeah, they didn't actually know Wanda was responsible for this, and instead went after Magneto, blaming him for this mess. Magneto was rightfully a bit confused by all of this, and was eventually given his memories back. And upon getting his memories back, he was pretty mad, and ends up killing Quicksilver. But Wanda revives him, and is pretty upset that Magneto would choose to save the Earth and humanity over his own kids. So, she says the famous line, "No more mutants." And suddenly, reality is back to normal. But with a cost. Almost every single mutant is no longer a mutant, and is now just a regular human being. The mutant population was once in the millions, but after this, it was now in the hundreds. This would later be known as M-Day. House of M ran for 8 issues and featured various tie-in stories about the heroes of this new world, like ones centered on Spider-Man, the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, and Hulk. As for its adaptations, House of M hasn't ever been fully adapted, although it did serve as heavy inspiration for WandaVision. The Starjammers. First appearing in X-Men issue 104, released in January of 1977, the Starjammers are an intergalactic superhero group that have various ties with the X-Men, with the biggest tie being the team's leader, Corsair. Corsair being the father of Cyclops and Havoc. Now, how did Scott's daddy get sent into Spacey? Well, while he and his family were in a plane, the Shi'ar alien empire that I mentioned earlier showed up and attacked. Chris Summers and his wife saved their kids by pushing them out of the plane with a parachute, but sadly, they weren't able to save themselves, as his wife was captured by the aliens and forced into a harem, only to then be executed in front of Chris. And to make matters worse, it turns out his wife was pregnant, and neither of them knew that. The Shi'ar then took this baby and sent him off into slavery after incubating him until adulthood. Aliens are weird, I don't know. This baby would eventually be revealed to be Gabriel Summers, aka Vulcan. Anyways, Chris was sent off to work in some space mines as a slave, but he wouldn't stay there long, as he and his newfound friends would escape and become the Starjammers, a group of heroes inspired by tales of earthly pirates. The Starjammers would not only work with the X-Men a whole bunch, but they'd also find themselves working alongside Hulk, the Inhumans, the Avengers, and the Guardians of the Galaxy, as they faced off against a variety of cosmic threats, like the Collector, the Mechans, Galactus, and a whole bunch of symbiotes. Another connection the Starjammers have with the X-Men is that a bunch of X-Men have actually joined the team at various points in time, including Cyclops, Polaris, Havoc, Rachel Summers, and even Professor X. As for the Starjammers' appearances in other media, they've appeared in X-Men the Animated Series and Marvel Ultimate Alliance. Although, Chris Summers, prior to becoming Corsair, has appeared in X-Men Evolution and X-Men Apocalypse. The source of Juggernaut's powers. One of the most common misconceptions about the X-Men is that Juggernaut, aka Cain Marko, is a mutant. While many people believe this, it's simply not true, at least in the comics. I think in most of the cartoons, games, and movies, he's probably a mutant. Anyways, Cain gets his powers from the Crimson Gem of Cyttorak, which turned him from a normal human being into the monster known as the Juggernaut. Basically, during the Korean War, Cain deserted the US military and stumbled upon a magic gem. This gem granted Cain the powers of Cyttorak after he touched it and read an inscription implanted in his mind. You see, Cyttorak is actually an extra-dimensional being who chooses people to be his avatars for the purpose of just causing destruction. So yeah, Juggernaut isn't actually a mutant in the comics. He's just Xavier's brother, who is the human avatar of an extra-dimensional demon god. Yeah, he's also Professor X's brother. Wacky character. The Inhumans take over. In the mid-2010s, Marvel made one of their most controversial decisions: to practically replace the mutants with the Inhumans. This led to Secret Wars 2015, which, in its aftermath, got rid of most of the mutants in the Marvel Universe. And while that was happening, there was a very large push for Inhumans comics that people just didn't really care about. I'm not saying people dislike the Inhumans, but they're nowhere near as popular or as important to the Marvel Universe than the mutants. So why did Marvel do this? Well, it was because of one man. Ike Perlmutter. Well, kinda one man. It was more than likely a multitude of stuff, but he was a major aspect of it. Ike Perlmutter is the former Marvel Entertainment CEO, and he really hated the fact that the MCU didn't have the X-Men or Fantastic Four because of Fox. He hated this so much that he decided to convince Disney to greenlight an Inhumans movie for the MCU, and ordered for the Inhumans to be much bigger players in the comics than the X-Men, because the way he saw it, he didn't want Marvel to be promoting characters being used by a rival film studio. Now, technically, this has never been flat out confirmed to have been what happened. However, if you look at the stuff that we do know, it's very clear this was more than likely what happened. I mean, there's a reason why the Fantastic Four comic was cancelled at the end of Secret Wars 2015. Because Fox owned them. We also know that Ike Perlmutter was heavily pushing for the Inhumans to be prominent characters in the MCU, so it's no wonder that they started having much more of a role in the Marvel Comics universe. This wasn't even just exclusively a comic thing. X-Men characters weren't included in video game crossovers either. For example, not a single mutant appears in Marvel vs. Capcom Infinite, despite the series literally beginning with the video game X-Men vs. Street Fighter. Luckily, the X-Men are back to being prominent characters over at Marvel. This is due to a couple of reasons. The low sales of Inhumans comics, the cancellation of the Inhumans movie, the absolute failure that was the Inhumans MCU series, and of course, the Disney Fox buyout. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's real father. So most people know that Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's dad is Magneto. Well, in the comics, that is. In the MCU, it's this dude. However, I just lied. Magneto isn't actually their father. Or at least, I mean, maybe he is, maybe he's not. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's dad has been retconned multiple times. Originally, their parents were a mystery, with the pair working under Magneto after he saved Wanda's life, though it would later be revealed that their parents were actually superheroes, the Whizzer and Miss America. But then it was retconned that their father wasn't the Whizzer, but instead a man named Django Maximoff. But then it was retconned again that Magneto was their biological father. But then it was retconned that their father wasn't actually Magneto. This was done because, as I mentioned earlier, Marvel Studios couldn't use the X-Men in the 2010s. So Marvel just removed Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's relationship with the main big bad of the X-Men. In fact, they weren't even mutants anymore. It turns out, they were kidnapped and then experimented on by the High Evolutionary, and these experiments are what gave them their powers. And most recently, it's been said that Django Maximoff was their foster father, although Magneto has also accepted Wanda as his surrogate daughter. So I guess he's still kinda their dad? Yeah, as of right now, we don't actually know their current biological father, though we do know their biological mother, that being Natalia Maximoff. The Gambit film. While promoting the film White House Down, Channing Tatum revealed that he wanted to play Gambit in a live-action X-Men film. He was apparently a big fan of the character, and since he's from New Orleans, he claimed that he could do a Cajun accent. This was published online in September of 2013, and so began the legend of the Gambit film. For those that don't know, from 2014 to 2019, a Gambit film starring Channing Tatum was always in some form of production, although it was constantly changing directors, producers, and writers. In January 2014, Lauren Schuler Donner revealed that she had begun planning a Gambit film with Channing Tatum, and by January of 2015, the film had an October of 2016 release date. Not only that, but plans were put in place for Channing Tatum's Gambit to be introduced in X-Men Apocalypse. In June 2015, Rupert Wyatt was hired to direct and write the film. But at the same time, it was also revealed that Channing Tatum would no longer be appearing in X-Men Apocalypse. Everything was looking great, until everything fell apart. While Rupert Wyatt wanted to make a lower stakes film about Gambit fighting mobsters and thieves, 20th Century Fox wanted to have the film to have some more stakes, as they wanted Gambit to be one of the main characters in the X-Men cinematic universe. Wyatt really didn't want to rewrite the film, but Fox was insisting he do it. And so, he left the project in September of 2015, because of budget cuts and not wanting to rewrite the film. Oh yeah, budget cuts. Yet despite Fox wanting the film to be bigger and crazier, they cut the film's budget because of the failure of Fan4Stick. At the time of Rupert Wyatt's departure from the film, production on Gambit was only 10 weeks away. Fox would eventually find a new director, Doug Liman, who quickly began work on the film's script. He described his version of Gambit as, quote, a heist movie and a sexy thriller. Although Fox would request the film to be rewritten, as according to Simon Kinberg, he, along with Channing Tatum and even Doug Liman, were unhappy with the film's script. In July 2016, the script was completed, and the movie would begin filming in early 2017. Everything was looking great. Until everything fell apart. Liman would leave the film in August of 2016, with him later revealing that he wasn't really feeling the script. And for over a year, the film would have no director or writer. Fox would then bring in Gore Verbinski to direct the film in October of 2017. And this time, it really seemed like it was actually going to happen. A costume designer was hired, Lizzie Kaplan and Little Ray Howery were in talks to star in the film with Tatum, and filming was set to begin in March of 2018. Everything was looking great, until everything fell apart. In January of 2018, Verbinski would leave the project due to scheduling issues and creative differences. And after that, Gambit would never have another director. But it would still continue development throughout 2018, with Simon Kinberg describing the film as having a more romantic comedy-like tone to it, and it would revolve around a heist. At this point in time, Channing Tatum and producer Reed Carolin began asking Fox to let them direct the film, but Fox didn't really want this because neither of them had ever directed anything before. And in May of 2019, it was finally announced that Gambit was cancelled due to the Disney-Fox merger. So what was this final version of Gambit going to look like? Well, we know that the film would have been a romantic comedy, with Mr. Sinister being one of the main villains. The film was also going to be R-rated with a similar tone to Deadpool. The story of the cancelled Gambit film is a tragic one, and it hurt nobody more than Channing Tatum himself, as he revealed in February of 2022 that he couldn't watch Marvel films anymore because his experience trying to make Gambit was just so upsetting.
Prepare for the mutant evolution. We'll be right back to X-Men on Disney XD. The X-Men have hit Burger King. Now in every Big Kids meal, you can get one of the X-Men like Cyclops or Rogue, and a mini CD-ROM with games and original dot-comic adventures. Rated E for everyone. You can collect all 8 at Burger King, home of the real Big Kids meal. Begin the mutant domination. Now back to X-Men on Disney XD.
Kitty Pryde film. In January of 2018, it was announced that a Kitty Pryde solo film was in development, with Brian Michael Bendis as the film's writer, and Tim Miller as the film's director. The film was codenamed 143, and went nowhere. Why did this film go nowhere? Well, because of the Disney-Fox merger. As for what this Kitty Pryde film was going to be about, we have no idea. Scrapped film mutants. Because films can only be so long, not every character the writers or director want to use in the film can be used. So a lot of mutants ended up getting cut from various X-Men films. Here's a list of most of the mutants cut from various films. Due to budget concerns, Nightcrawler, Pyro, and Beast were cut from the first X-Men film. Gambit was also supposed to have a cameo in the film, where he would be played by Keanu Reeves. Originally, Toad, Sabretooth, and Angel were supposed to be in X2. Angel would have been transformed into Archangel at Stryker's lab, while Sabretooth and Toad would be working for Stryker. While not a mutant, Nick Fury was also planned to be in the film at one point. Also, Shaquille O'Neal tried to convince Fox to let him play Bishop in the film, but because David Hayter, one of X2's writers, didn't know anything about Bishop, he was ignored. Originally, Gambit would have appeared in X-Men 3, where he would have served as a romantic rival to Iceman. Nightcrawler was also planned to return at one point, but was removed from the film because Fox didn't want to spend money on Nightcrawler's makeup. Dazzler and Lady Deathstrike were also planned to appear in the film, but once Bryan Singer left the project, so did they. While not a mutant, originally, Barbarous was going to appear in X-Men Origins Wolverine. He would meet up with Wolverine in New Orleans. Also, as I mentioned earlier, Storm was originally going to have a cameo in the film as a kid. Mr. Sinister and Sunspot were originally supposed to appear in X-Men First Class, with Kevin Bacon being hired to play Sinister. Originally, Rogue was going to appear in The Wolverine. Juggernaut, Jubilee, Gambit, Rachel Summers, Nightcrawler, Psylocke, Deadpool, and Rockslide were all planned to appear in Days of Future Past. Juggernaut was originally going to be the mutant that helped break Magneto out of jail, and would have been played by Josh Hellman. It's unknown where Deadpool, Psylocke, and Gambit were going to be in the film, but we know that Rachel Summers, Jubilee, and Rockslide were going to be in the future portion of the film, while Nightcrawler would have been in the past portion of the film. Originally, Wire, Sluggo, and Garrison Kane were going to appear in Deadpool as Ajax's henchmen. Cannonball was also intended to be in the film, but was replaced by Negasonic Teenage Warhead, as the film's writers believed her and Colossus would make for a funnier pair. As mentioned earlier, Gambit was originally supposed to be in X-Men Apocalypse, where he would be played by Channing Tatum. Also, while she was never actually going to appear in the film, a Dazzler record was going to appear in the film at one point. Originally, Sabretooth was going to appear in Logan, where he'd be a casino owner in Oklahoma City, who would help Wolverine, Professor X, and Laura. Also, it's unknown how many of the original X-Men were planned, but we were originally supposed to see the Westchester incident happen. If I had to speculate, we'd probably see Cyclops, Jean Grey, Rogue, and Storm, but this is just speculation. While not cut from the film, Vanessa was originally supposed to become Copycat in Deadpool 2. Also, while not mutants, Human Torch and The Thing from the mid-2000s Fantastic Four films were considered for Deadpool 2. Thing would have also battled Juggernauts at the end of the film. There were also ideas for the Fantastic Four from Fan4stick to appear in the film, with all of their actors reprising their roles. But this was rejected pretty early on for pretty obvious reasons. Originally, Psylocke and Wolverine were intended to return in Dark Phoenix. Psylocke would have presumably been part of the X-Men, and Wolverine was originally supposed to be a love interest for Jean Grey. As for the New Mutants, originally, Professor X, Storm, and Warlock were going to be in the film, with James McAvoy and Alexandra Shipp reprising their roles, and Sacha Baron Cohen playing Warlock. Then there's Mr. Sinister, who was intended to appear in the film's after-credits scene and would be played by John Hamm. But this was cut, and replaced with Antonio Banderas appearing as Emmanuel da Costa, Sunspot's father. But this was also scrapped. And finally, as for Deadpool and Wolverine, Juggernaut from the original X-Men films was going to make a cameo in the film, with Vinnie Jones reprising his role. However, he declined the offer to come back, due to not wanting to wear the Juggernaut costume again because of the mental and physical toll it put on him during the filming of X-Men 3. Although, Juggernaut would still cameo in Deadpool and Wolverine, just not with Vinnie Jones reprising the role. Blob cannibalizes Wasp. So like I mentioned earlier, the Ultimate Universe was fairly controversial. Another controversy comes from Ultimatum Issue 2, released in December of 2008, where it's revealed that Wasp, who was missing for a bit, was killed by Blob. But Blob didn't just kill Wasp, who, by the way, was a mutant in this universe. No. He ate her. Like, he actually ate her. And according to Blob, she tasted like chicken. When Hank Pym found out about this, he wasn't really happy, and bit off Blob's head. Pride of the X-Men. Pride of the X-Men is a 30-minute-long special released in September of 1989 that was essentially the pitch for X-Men the Animated Series. The special isn't canon to the series and takes place in its own little continuity. And it's a fairly strange little continuity, as Wolverine for some reason talks with an Australian accent, and Emma Frost was part of the Brotherhood of Mutants. Apparently Wolverine was chosen to sound Australian because Crocodile Dundee was popular around the time of the pilot's production. Anyways, the pilot was animated by Toei Animation, although they weren't actually credited for its creation. Interestingly, the budget for this pilot actually came from the cancelled 13th episode of the RoboCop animated series being made around the same time. Because Marvel was one of the show's production companies, they took funding away from the show to create this. As for the plot of the pilot, it's a very simple heroes versus villains storyline that follows Kitty Pryde as she joins the X-Men. Or at least, she tries to join the X-Men. Despite helping out on a mission, Wolverine tells her that she's not yet a member. Probably because Kitty needed rescuing a whole bunch of times in this single outing. The most notable thing about this pilot was the fact that it followed Kitty Pryde, a character who wouldn't show up in the X-Men animated series at all. Not even a cameo. Instead, when X-Men the Animated Series was in production, Kitty Pryde was replaced with Jubilee. Despite this pilot not getting picked up for a full-on show, the pilot would actually go and inspire the legendary 1992 X-Men arcade game. Overall, Pride of the X-Men is a really good-looking pilot that's vastly overshadowed by the two projects that came out of it: X-Men the Animated Series and the 1992 arcade game. New Mutants 2 and 3. So the original plan for the New Mutants film was that it was going to be the beginning of a trilogy of films. Obviously, this didn't end up happening because of the Disney-Fox buyout. Surprisingly, we actually know quite a bit about these cancelled follow-ups. New Mutants 2 would take place in Brazil, with Antonio Banderas playing Sunspot's father, the main antagonist of the film. The movie would be about the New Mutants traveling to Brazil to reunite Sunspot with his mom. However, Sunspot's dad would find out about his son's arrival and attempt to have him killed. Warlock was also planned to appear in the film, along with the character Karma, who would be a villain, but would eventually join the New Mutants. Also, this film would have involved an alien invasion of Brazil. As for the New Mutants 3, this film would have been an adaptation of the Inferno saga from the comics, with Magik being the film's protagonist. However, that's all we really know about this third installment. Deadpool kills the Marvel Universe. Written by Cullen Bunn, and releasing throughout August of 2012, Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe is a miniseries taking place in an alternate universe where Deadpool decides to kill everyone. He decides to do this once he realizes that he's a fictional character, and decides to quote-unquote save everyone from suffering as fictional characters by killing them. And by everyone, I mean everyone. He kills the Avengers, the Fantastic Four, Spider-Man, Luke Cage, the X-Men, the Punisher, the Watcher, just everyone. There's not really a plot to the story, to be honest with you. It's just Deadpool killing people. It's not a very serious story. Although, It kind of is. Like, it's very clear you're not supposed to take it very seriously, but a lot of the kills are just, like, kind of sad. Like Sue Storm's death in particular. It's not really funny or entertaining seeing Deadpool kill a woman grieving over the murder of her family. Honestly, the story's kind of like tonally confused in my opinion, though it was popular as it spawned 2 sequels, Deadpool Killustrated and Deadpool Kills Deadpool. Killustrated has Deadpool deciding to travel into a pocket dimension known as the Ideaverse, which is a universe filled with classic literature characters. So he decides to kill everyone there in order to prevent them from inspiring comic characters like himself. And in Deadpool Kills Deadpool, Deadpool travels throughout the multiverse to kill every single Deadpool, which eventually leads him into conflict with the main universe Deadpool, who ends up killing him. The series was very popular, and eventually inspired the Unbeatable Squirrel Girl Beats Up the Marvel Universe one-shot, released in December of 2016. Although, Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe was actually inspired by the one-shot Punisher Kills the Marvel Universe, released in November of 1995. Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe would also receive a successor comic titled Deadpool Kills the Marvel Universe Again, releasing from July 2017 to September of the same year, and was also written by Cullen Bunn. This series is far more comedic than the previous one, as this time around, Deadpool thinks that he's having a bunch of fun adventures with his friends, when in reality, he's been turned into a sleeper agent and is actually killing everyone. Jubilee was a vampire. 2010's Curse of the Mutants event was, at its core, the X-Men teaming up with Blade to go and fight some vampires. And it's during this storyline that Jubilee becomes a vampire after being bitten by Xeris, Dracula's son. Jubilee would even turn Wolverine into a vampire for a period of time, although Wolverine would be cured of his vampirism by the end of the event, thanks to some nanobots in his body activating his healing factor, purging the vampirism out of his body. Jubilee, on the other hand, wasn't cured, although she was given some of Wolverine's blood. This would heal her just a bit in order to get rid of her bloodlust, but she was still a vampire. And surprisingly, this was an element of her character that would remain until January of 2018, when in Generation X issue 86, she would be cured by Kid Omega, who at the time had the Phoenix Force. He used the last of his powers to heal her. During her time as a vampire, Jubilee would adopt a kid named Shogo, take part in Avengers vs. X-Men, battle vampires with Captain America, and learned how to walk around during the day thanks to the help of a vampire group known as the Forgiven. Cancelled X-Men Origins series. So X-Men Origins Wolverine was actually supposed to be at the beginning of a spin-off series in the X-Men Cinematic Universe. I mean, it still ended up becoming a spin-off series, but it wasn't supposed to originally be all about Wolverine. The original plan was for X-Men Origins to be a series of films going over the origin stories of popular X-Men characters. The most famous of these cancelled films is X-Men Origins Magneto, which was going to be directed by David S. Goyer, and would have been written by Sheldon Turner. The film was primarily set between 1939 and 1955, though there were going to be scenes set in the present day with Ian McKellen reprising the role of Magneto. At least, that was the idea, as eventually the film's timeline would be pushed to 1962, and Ian McKellen decided not to reprise his role. The film would have also had Mr. Sinister as the main villain. While the film was cancelled, ideas from the film would be used in X-Men First Class. X-Men Origins Magneto wasn't the only cancelled Origins film, though. There were plans for X-Men Origins Deadpool and X-Men Origins Gambit. There's not really much known about the Gambit film, but we know that Origins Deadpool would have ignored Deadpool's appearance in X-Men Origins Wolverine, and was going to be written by Rhett Reese and Paul Wernick. And as you can probably figure out, this film would eventually turn into the Deadpool film we actually ended up getting in 2016. Peepers. First appearing in Captain America Annual Issue 4, released in May of 1977, Peter Quinn, not Peter Quill, has pretty much no backstory. He was just a mutant who was recruited by Magneto into the Brotherhood of Mutants. Surprisingly, his first outing wasn't against the X-Men. It was against Captain America. Although the fight against Captain America didn't really go so well for them, so Magneto kicked them out. So Peter, now going by the name Peeper, and a bunch of other mutants decided to create their own group of evil mutants, called Mutant Force. And they just kinda became villains for hire, being hired by various villains, like the Mandrill, the Red Skull, and the US government. But unfortunately for him, John Walker Captain America didn't really like mutants, so he nearly beat them all to death. Now admittedly, this guy doesn't really seem all that interesting so far, so you're probably wondering why I'm even spotlighting him. Well, it's for two reasons. The first being, during his fight with John Walker Captain America, he was electrocuted pretty badly. And shortly after that, he was electrocuted again by the hero Bolt. And this messed him up big time, and he began to have a Gollum-like personality where he began talking about himself in a third person, and started calling himself Peepers. Eventually, Peepers would leave his little group of criminals, and would actually become a hero. Well, only after being torn apart. Yeah, that's the second reason. He was killed by Predator X, but then just shows up alive again, literally a decade later, in an issue of Gwenpool. To this day, it's never actually been explained how he came back to life. Anyways, he would join S.W.O.R.D. and become an ally to the X-Men. As for Peeper's powers, he's got superhuman vision. Basically, his eyes act like a telescope and let him see things hundreds of miles away. His eyes also double as a microscope, and his eyes triple as a laser gun. As for his appearances in other media, he's only ever appeared in X-Men the Animated Series. Bryan Singer's X-Men The Last Stand. So Bryan Singer directed a few of the X-Men films, and he was actually supposed to direct X-Men The Last Stand. However, this didn't end up happening because of Superman Returns. After doing 2 X-Men films, Bryan Singer wanted to take an X-Men break and do another film. But Fox really wanted to get X-Men 3 made, and they really didn't want to wait for him to finish Superman. Though he did have plans for the film. Bryan Singer's X-Men 3 would adapt the Phoenix Saga, and would have Cyclops be one of the film's main characters. The X-Men, Brotherhood of Mutants, and the Hellfire Club would battle each other for control of the Phoenix Force, with the Hellfire Club being led by Emma Frost. As mentioned previously, Dazzler and Gambit would also be in the film, and it would be revealed that Lady Deathstrike survived the events of X2. The film would end with Jean sacrificing her life by forcing Cyclops to laser her to death. Original casting. So during the course of the X-Men cinematic universe, a ton of actors were either considered for roles, auditioned for roles, or were even offered roles. Here's a massive list of just some of the actors who were considered for roles, auditioned for roles, or were offered roles, but for one reason or another, didn't end up playing the role. For Wolverine, Russell Crowe, Doug Reese-Scott, Keanu Reeves, Aaron Eckhart, Edward Norton, Jean-Claude Van Damme, Mel Gibson, and Viggo Mortensen were considered for the role. For the original Professor X, Michael Jackson was actually considered for the role. As for young Professor X, Boyd Holbrook, Jamie Dornan, Patrick J. Adams, and Jonas Armstrong were considered for the role. As for the original Magneto, John Hurt, Terrence Stamp, and Christopher Lee were considered for the role. As for young Magneto, Andrew Garfield, Aaron Taylor Johnson, Jack Houston, and Frank Delane were considered for the role. As for the original Cyclops, Thomas Jane, Ben Affleck, Ethan Hawke, Matt Damon, Edward Burns, Luke Wilson, Vince Vaughn, Jim Caviezel, and D.B. Sweeney were considered for the role. As for the young Cyclops, not the X-Men Origins one, the one from like the newer trilogy, Josh Hutcherson, Timothy Chalamet, Dylan O'Brien, Jesse Plemons, Ben Hardy, and Charlie Rowe were considered for the role. For the original Mystique, Lucy Liu and Jerry Ryan were considered for the role. For the original Jean Grey, Charlize Theron, Peta Wilson, Helen Hunt, Lucy Lawless, Selma Blair, Renee O'Connor, and Maria Bello were considered for the role. As for the young Jean Grey, Haley Steinfeld, Daisy Ridley, Margot Robbie, Elle Fanning, Chloe Grace Moritz, Grace Caroline Curry, and Lily Collins were considered for the role. As for Deadpool, Jensen Ackles was considered for the role. As for the original Storm, Jade Pinkett, Janet Jackson, and Angela Bassett were considered for the role. As for young Storm, Zendaya, Zazie Beetz, and Amber Stevens-West were considered for the role. For Apocalypse, Tom Hardy and Idris Elba were considered for the role. As for Quicksilver, Jamie Campbell Bower and Nico Tortorella were considered for the role. As for Kitty Pryde, Maggie Grace, Summer Glau, and Eliza Dushku were considered for the role. As for Cable, Brad Pitt, Liam Neeson, David Harbour, Michael Shannon, John Cena, Edge, Pierce Brosnan, Alec Baldwin, Sylvester Stallone, Russell Crowe, Ron Perlman, Bruce Willis, and Dolph Lundgren were considered for the role. As for Domino, Mary Elizabeth Winston, Kerry Washington, Lizzie Kaplan, Ruby Rose, Eve Hewson, Sienna Miller, and Gugu Mbatha-Raw were considered for the role. For Rogue, Natalie Portman, Sarah Michelle Gellar, Kristen Dunst, Drew Barrymore, Katie Holmes, Alicia Silverstone, Rachel Lee Cook, and Catherine Isabel were considered for the role. As for the original Beast, Jason Fleming was considered for the role. As for the young Beast, Taylor Lautner, Benjamin Walker, and Jason Behr were considered for the role. As for X-23, Millie Bobby Brown was considered for the role. As for Gambit, Chris Hemsworth, Scott Porter, and Alden Ehrenreich were considered for the role. As for Viper, Jessica Biel was considered for the role. As for Yukio, Jessica Henwick and Katie Leon were considered for the role. As for Vuk, Angelina Jolie was considered for the role. As for Vanessa, Olivia Munn, Rebecca Rittenhouse, Crystal Reed, and Taylor Schilling were considered for the role. And finally, for Cecilia Reyes, Rosario Dawson was considered for the role. X-Men The Animated Series Season 6. Now, technically, we have X-Men The Animated Series Season 6 with X-Men 97. However, there was supposed to be a 6th season in the 1990s. The season would have began with a time skip. A few of the members of the team had actually left, and the ones who were still around were constantly fighting with each other. Although, they would eventually be forced back together and head off into space, upon hearing a distress signal from the Shi'ar Empire. After this arc, they would return to Earth and continue being the X-Men. There was also an episode planned that would have focused on Colossus and his relationship with his sister Magik. The episode would have taken place in Russia and would have seen the return of Omega Red. Probably the craziest plan for the 6th season of the show was a full-on crossover TV movie with the Mighty Morphin Power Rangers. This was only in the cards because X-Men The Animated Series wasn't doing super well in ratings by its 5th season, which was one of the reasons why it was cancelled in the first place. This crossover was pitched by Will Meugniot. Jean Grey kinda outs Iceman. So in all-new X-Men issue 40, released in April of 2015, Iceman is revealed to be gay. This caused some controversy. Obviously, there's the goo-goo gaga babies that whine and cry about stuff being quote-unquote woke, but that's not what I'm talking about. You see, in the story, Jean Grey discovers that Iceman's gay after reading his mind. And upon reading his mind, she confronts him about it. She keeps telling him that he's gay, and he's like, well, maybe I'm bi. And she's like, no, you're gay. She's very insistent on it. And this has led some fans to claim that Jean outed Iceman. And like, I mean, like, I guess technically she outs him to, like, the reader, but in-universe, she doesn't. It's not like she goes up to his friends and family and tells them that he's gay. I guess you can argue that she helped him come out, because she helped him realize who he is, but that's not the same thing as forcing him to come out by outing him. Personally, I think this interaction's written a little bit weird, but like, it's very clear it wasn't written with any ill intentions. I think saying that she outed him is a really big, like, stretch. I don't know. What are your guys' opinions on this? Leave your thoughts in the comments below. Onslaught. First appearing in either X-Men issue 50, released in January of 1996, or Cable issue 31, released in March of 1996. Onslaught is one of the weirder big bads of the X-Men. He's a rather strange being, as his parents are Professor X and Magneto. No, this does not mean there was Mpreg involved. During the Fatal Attractions event, Professor X and Magneto had their minds temporarily merged. And when that happened, all of the anger, hatred, resentment, and aggression from both parties merged into one, creating Onslaught. Onslaught's goal was pretty simple: wipe out humanity so that mutants could thrive. But then he was like, oh, mutants kinda suck too, and changed his goal to just kill everyone, and merge everyone's consciousness into one single entity, creating a twisted version of peace on Earth. And so, he began recruiting mutants to his cause, like Blob, Post, and Mimic. But while he was recruiting these mutants, he was actually pretending to be Xavier, as he was trapped inside Xavier's mind. This eventually led to the Onslaught event, where he would serve as the main antagonist. Shocker, I know. During this event, he would do battle with the X-Men, Fantastic Four, and the Avengers. Why did the Fantastic Four and the Avengers get involved? Well, because Onslaught, who was still inside Xavier's body, kidnapped Franklin Richards, Reed and Sue's son, in order to use his powers to help him create this so-called peace. He would then capture Nate Gray as well, aka the X-Man, becoming even more powerful. Eventually, the event would come to an end when various heroes absorbed Onslaught's power in order to drain him of his power. This would ultimately lead to his defeat, and the deaths of all of the heroes. Except not really, as this is where the Heroes Reborn event comes into play, as Franklin Richards saved all of the heroes' lives by creating a pocket dimension where they were all sent to for a bit. Anyways, Onslaught was defeated, but not exactly dead. He would return in the Onslaught Reborn miniseries, releasing from November 2006 to January of 2008, where in the aftermath of House of M, Onslaught was, well, reborn. And in order to prevent another massive destructive battle, Franklin Richards created a new pocket dimension based on the Heroes Reborn universe, where Onslaught was sent to do battle with that universe's heroes. Onslaught was eventually defeated by being sent to the Negative Zone, but would return again in the Onslaught Unleashed miniseries, released from February of 2011 to May of the same year. He would return by possessing Ricky Barnes, a member of the Young Allies. Although this didn't last long, as he was defeated yet again, and was seemingly defeated for good. Just kidding, he actually came back in the miniseries Way of X, now going by the name of Patchwork Man. Onslaught was brought back by an anti-mutants group in order to destroy the mutant nation of Krakoa. So Onslaught was placed inside of a mutant named Lost in order to infiltrate the country. He would eventually be discovered and would be defeated by the entire country joining forces to defeat him. And as of right now, he's dead for good. But I'm sure he'll be back in no time. As for Onslaught's powers, oh boy, okay, so he's got telepathy, which allows him to mind control people. It also allows him to make people lose their memories, create a mental shield to protect him from other telepaths, and even create illusions. He's also got telekinesis, and can create psionic spikes. He's also got the power of magnetism, and he can manipulate fire and electricity. He can also create EMPs, and stop people's blood from pumping. He also has the ability to absorb mutations. And of course, he's got superhuman strength. As for his appearances in other media, he's appeared in Marvel vs. Capcom 1, Contest of Champions, and Superhero Squad Online. Excalibur. First appearing in Excalibur Special Edition, released in December of 1987, Excalibur is essentially an X-Men team located primarily in the United Kingdom. The team was created in the aftermath of the Fall of the Mutants storyline, and the supposed deaths of the X-Men. Basically, during a fight with the villain Adversary, in order to defeat him, the X-Men had to sacrifice their lives for a spell that would seal Adversary away forever. Well, in theory, he'd be locked away forever. Anyways, they all technically died here, but were then instantly resurrected thanks to the goddess Roma, who made it so that the X-Men are invisible to all forms of surveillance. So the cameras recording the event didn't actually record them being resurrected, and so the entire world believed they were dead. Anyways, because Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler weren't with the rest of the team during this battle, they believed that their friends and family had all died. But it wasn't just Kitty Pryde and Nightcrawler who were sad, as Captain Britain, who was with them, was also pretty sad. Anyways, while they were all grieving, some bounty hunters arrived in the UK to hunt down Rachel Summers. Not wanting their friend to be captured, Kitty, Nightcrawler, Captain Britain, and Captain Britain's girlfriend, Megan, joined forces to save her. And after saving her, they decided to create a new team of X-Men, named after King Arthur's sword. And so, Excalibur was born. And when it was revealed to them that the X-Men were still alive, they actually still kept the team going. Over the years, various mutants have joined the team, like Psylocke, Colossus, Jubilee, Rogue, Gambit, Dazzler, and even Apocalypse. Yeah, Apocalypse was part of the team at one point. But as shown by Captain Britain, and even Juggernaut, you don't have to be a mutant to be part of the team. While Excalibur does fight crime, their specialty is dealing with the supernatural and other magical forces, and often find themselves in the other world. Sadly, the team has only ever appeared in one piece of media, Marvel Avengers Alliance. James Cameron's Wolverine and the X-Men. In 1991, James Cameron's company, Lightstorm Entertainment, was in talks with Marvel to produce a live-action X-Men film titled Wolverine and the X-Men. The film ultimately never happened, but if it did, it would probably be known as one of the weirdest adaptations of the X-Men. Written by Gary Goldman, the film would have followed Wolverine and Kitty Pryde as the film's main characters, with Bob Hoskins being looked at to play Wolverine. After saving Kitty from a gang, Wolverine would bring her into the X-Mansion, where the film would introduce the rest of the main cast, Professor X, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Nightcrawler, and Mastermind. The team would battle in the Danger Room for a lot of the first act of the film, until the movie's big bad showed up, Magneto. Except not really. No, the villain of this movie was an original character inspired by Magneto. His name was Thomas Prince, and was the CEO of the Metalworks Corporation, the Citizen Crusade, who really wanted to be president. He's also a secret mutant, having the powers of magnetism. He eventually convinces Mastermind to join him, and has him frame the X-Men for terror attacks on various religious institutes. He then rewards Mastermind with his own personal harem. Anyways, this turns the world against the X-Men, and eventually the entire team, minus Wolverine and Kitty, are arrested and sentenced to death via electric crucifixion. Wolverine would then be killed, as would Mastermind, as he eventually decides to side with the X-Men over Prince. However, unlike Mastermind, Wolverine would actually come back to life, thanks to his healing factor, and would claw himself out of his grave to rescue the X-Men. The team would then work together to defeat Prince, and the day is saved. This film was cancelled because while James Cameron was working on the film, Stan Lee would approach him and ask him if he wanted to make a Spider-Man movie instead. And so, he decided to cancel the film in favor of Spider-Man, which was eventually cancelled as well. She Lies with Angels. Written by Chuck Austin and released from January of 2004 to March of the same year, She Lies with Angels is a story arc in Uncanny X-Men that follows Archangel and Husk getting involved in a Romeo and Juliet-style romance as Husk returns to her home in Kentucky and discovers that her brother, Josh, is in a relationship with a human woman named Julia, from a family who absolutely hates Josh's family, and vice versa. This relationship infuriated a lot of people, but angered Julia's father the most. Julia's dad, Chester, decided to take matters into his own hands, and tried to kill Josh with some battle armor. And he nearly did. Julia was pretty upset, and Avengers Endgamed herself by drowning with Josh's body, but she goofed because Josh has a healing factor and came back to life. Upset by her death, he attempted to Avengers Endgame himself, but the X-Men would arrive and stop him. Meanwhile, Chester gets his head blown apart by a local cop after Chester decides to kill some more people. And finally, the most infamous part of the story. During this whole story arc, Archangel realizes that he's in love with Husk, and the pair gets together, banging while flying above Husk's family home. In fact, her mom watches as the two of them begin to bang, but she does eventually leave. But it gets weirder, because Husk was 19 at the time of this event, which, yes, is legal, but Archangel knew her when she was a teenager. So, yeah, it's pretty weird. Not good. Pretty gross, actually. Patch. So remember how I mentioned that the X-Men were believed to be dead for a bit? Well, during that time, Wolverine lived in Madripoor for a bit. And while living there, Wolverine realized that he needed a disguise. After all, the X-Men are supposed to be dead in the public eye. So he's got to keep his identity a secret. So he puts on an eye patch and just starts calling himself Patch. And he went by the name Patch for a little bit, fighting crime in Madripoor. He did this for about a year in the real world, from 1988 to 1989. So this, in Wolverine's overall story, didn't really last very long. But despite this, Patch has actually become a rather iconic version of Wolverine. Probably because the idea of Wolverine in a tuxedo and an eye patch is admittedly pretty cool. This eventually led to the creation of Diamond Patch, who first appeared in Infinity Wars issue 3, released in September of 2018, as an amalgamation between Wolverine and Emma Frost. And most recently, the creation of the Wolverine Patch miniseries, written by Larry Hama, which ran from March 2022 to August of the same year. As for Patch's appearances in other media, Patch has appeared in Fortnite and Deadpool and Wolverine. Sugar Man. First appearing in Generation Next issue 2, released in February of 1995, Sugar Man is a very disgusting mutant that looks like if a Street Shark and Cool Spots had a kid. He originates from the Age of Apocalypse reality, where he ran human work camps, where he would regularly torture the people enslaved there. Sugar Man would attempt to stop the X-Men from sending Bishop into the past to stop this apocalyptic future. But he failed. However, when reality was fixed, instead of disappearing, Sugar Man was actually sent to the main Marvel Universe, where he would continue to be an enemy of the X-Men, but this time in secret, as he hid away in Genosha, where he would create slaves he could rule over. But his plans were eventually foiled by Cable, who discovered his secret lab, causing Sugar Man to activate a self-destruct device to keep his plans a secret. He continued working in the shadows for a while, even returning to his home reality for a bit to create a bioweapon to use on the main universe's X-Men. Funny enough, in the aftermath of the House of M event, Sugar Man was actually one of the few mutants who kept their powers, and he used his powers to continue being a menace. Interestingly, Sugar Man has died multiple times, but keeps coming back to life, with no explanation. His first death was at the hands of Omega Sentinel, who beat him to death with a pipe. Years later, he would be impaled multiple times with pieces of metal by Magneto, killing him. And then finally, Sugar Man was killed off-screen by Nate Gray, the X-Man. But like William Afton, he always comes back. As for Sugar Man's abilities, he's got some pretty strange ones. His tongue can stretch out and grab things. Hell, it can even stab through things like steel. He can also grow and shrink at will, and he's also a genius when it comes to genetics. He's also got the ability to smell fear itself. He's also got an enhanced metabolism, which is probably the reason why he keeps coming back to life. As for his appearances in other media, Sugar Man has appeared in Marvel Avengers Alliance, X-Men Legends 2, Rise of Apocalypse, and Marvel superheroes What the? Wolverine, the best there is. Releasing from December 2010 to December 2011, Wolverine, the best there is a miniseries written by Charlie Huston that is rather infamous for its poor quality. While the art is pretty good, the writing is where the comic suffers, because it's very clear that the writer was trying to make this series with the same tone as the Marvel Max line of comics. But it's not a Marvel Max story, so it's never really allowed to be as ultra edgy and badass as the comic wants to be. For example, all of the swearing is censored, and there is a lot of it. But despite the censored swearing, the story does like the show torture. In fact, a good chunk of the story is just Wolverine being tortured by the villain Contagion, who looks suspiciously like Marilyn Manson. Side note, Contagion is also Doctor Doom's adopted nephew for some reason. And with torture comes a lot of gore. Like, this series has a ton of really just gross gore. However, the gore isn't like shocking or anything like that. Probably because it's in the same story where they can't swear. So any impact of the gore is severely lessened. It's also revealed in this series that Wolverine wants to kill Simon Cowell and cannot dance to save his life. Psylocke's very complicated history. Out of every X-Men character, Psylocke is probably the most confusing. Or at least in the top 5. How confusing is she? Well, let's go over the question, what's Psylocke's race? Well, she's white and Asian. No, she's not mixed. I mean, she's literally white and Asian. You see, Psylocke is technically two people in one body, except not really. It's a body swap story. Let me explain. One day, Betsy Braddock, who is white and Psylocke, ended up getting amnesia and was captured by the Hand, who took her mind and placed it inside of another woman's body. That woman being Kwannon, a Japanese assassin. But this process had one major mishap. It accidentally merged their minds together. Betsy would eventually rejoin the X-Men in her new Japanese body, only for her to then get confronted by Kwannon, who was inside Betsy's old body. And because their memories had merged at one point, Kwannon now believed that she was the real Betsy. Eventually, this would all work out, and Kwannon would remember who she was, and take up the mantle of Revanche, and would even join the X-Men. So basically, there were two Psylocks on the team. The original Psylocke, who was now in somebody else's body, and somebody else inside the original Psylocke body. That was until Kwannon died. So now Betsy was the only Psylocke. But then Betsy would have her soul absorbed by a psychic vampire. Betsy would then defeat the vampire in the astral plane, and then rebuild her white body. She was then revived in that body. But this somehow also revived Kwannon, who was now revived in her original body. So Betsy and Kwannon were finally in their own bodies. Kwannon would then take up the mantle of Psylocke, while Betsy would become Captain Britain. So yeah, Psylocke was a white woman inside of an Asian woman's body for quite a while.
Prepare for the mutant evolution. We'll be right back to X-Men on Disney XD.
New from Chef Boyardee, all your favorite X-Men in pasta shapes and excellent sauce. We got 'em, and only you can set them free. New X-Men pasta. It's not just a meal, it's an adventure.
Begin the mutant domination. Now back to X-Men on Disney XD.
X-Men Evolution Season 5. X-Men Evolution was cancelled after its 4th season. However, a 5th season was being planned at one point. Luckily, we actually know a little bit about this cancelled 5th season. As teased in the final episode, the 5th season would adapt the Phoenix Saga, and would have had Jean become the Phoenix and die. Her death would then lead to Cyclops and Rogue becoming a couple. There were also some discussions about bringing back Apocalypse, and according to Frank Puar, Emma Frost would have made her debut in the 5th season. And as of right now, that's all we know about Evolution Season 5. X-Men, Daredevil, and Fantastic Four Civil War film. In 2010, Zack Stentz and Ashley Edward Miller were hired by Fox to write a film set in the X-Men cinematic universe. However, this wouldn't be an X-Men film. It would be an adaptation of Civil War. Now you're probably wondering, how could Fox adapt Civil War when they didn't have the rights to Iron Man or Captain America? Well, it's simple. They would adapt Civil War, but only using characters they owned. So it was going to be a big crossover with X-Men, Fantastic Four, and Daredevil. It's unknown if they would have retroactively made Daredevil 2003, Elektra, Fantastic Four 2004, and Rise of the Silver Surfer canon, or would use brand new versions of the Fantastic Four and Daredevil. If I had to guess, it's probably the latter. At least with Daredevil, because I cannot imagine Ben Affleck ever agreeing to reprise the role. Anyways, Paul Greengrass was asked to direct the film, and nothing ever came from this. We know that 2 scripts for the film exist, one written by Zack Stentz and Ashley Edward Miller, and another one written by Warren Ellis. But as of right now, we don't really know a ton about this film's plot. We do know that Wolverine and Reed Richards would be the leaders of the 2 factions in the film, and the Human Torch would be the catalyst for the Superhero Registration Act being enacted. As when he tries to stop the villain Molecule Man, he goes supernova and accidentally creates an enormous explosion in New York City. And finally, we know the film's after-credits scene was going to tease a Skrull invasion. As to why the film was cancelled, we just don't know. It's actually never been revealed why it was cancelled. 2 Emma Frosts. So the X-Men cinematic universe is very famous for having very different versions of the same character. For instance, Colossus in X2, X-Men The Last Stand, and Days of Future Past is a very different Colossus than the one featured in Deadpool, Deadpool 2, and Deadpool and Wolverine. Same goes with Sunspot from Days of Future Past and Sunspot from The New Mutants. or Yukio in The Wolverine, and Yukio from Deadpool 2 and Deadpool and Wolverine. But these can be explained by being the same character, just in 2 different timelines. But it's a bit different with Emma Frost. In X-Men Origins Wolverine, we very briefly see Emma Frost in action when she escapes Stryker's prison in 1979, and it's revealed that she's the younger sister of Kayla Silverfox. But then, in X-Men First Class, we're introduced to Emma Frost again, but this time in 1962. And not only does she look very different, she's now part of the Hellfire Club, and she's also older than she was in Origins Wolverine, now being an adult. It's then mentioned in Days of Future Past that Emma Frost was killed in 1963, despite her being alive in X-Men Origins Wolverine. So, what's going on here? Well, the truth is, Emma Frost in Origins Wolverine is not actually Emma Frost. Despite calling herself Emma Frost in a Blu-ray extra, it's been revealed by Lauren Schuler Donner, a producer on various X-Men films, that they aren't related to each other at all. So it seems that she was supposed to be Emma Frost, but then they decided to have a more comic-accurate version of the character in First Class, so they just retconned that character. But yeah, anyways, in the original X-Men film universe, there's just 2 different Emma Frosts. Olivia Munn wanted to wear a comic-accurate Psylocke costume. So Psylocke's most iconic outfit in the comics is pretty explicit, and because of this, a lot of people figured that if Psylocke were ever put into a film, her costume would get a heavy redesign. And that was almost going to be the case. However, Olivia Munn actually fought back against this change. Turns out, the original plan was for her costume to be black with a purple sash. But upon seeing this, Olivia Munn requested it to be purple with a red sash like the comics. She said that she wanted to do this because she wanted to adapt the character properly. Honestly, this entry probably isn't iceberg-worthy, but I wanted to include it in the video since the X-Men films were allergic to giving their characters comic designs. So it's pretty cool to see an actor who worked on the film fighting for a comic-accurate costume. Although admittedly it is kinda weird to see that costume in a concentration camp, but that's the least of that film's problems. The original Deadpool 2. So remember how I talked about how in Deadpool 2, there were plans for Vanessa to become Copycat, and for the Thing to battle Juggernaut? Well, these plans were from the original version of Deadpool 2. Originally, Deadpool 2 was going to be directed by Tim Miller, returning from the first Deadpool film. However, due to creative differences with Ryan Reynolds, Miller left the project in October of 2016. So what was Tim Miller's version of Deadpool 2 going to look like? Well, besides the stuff that I've already mentioned, the film would have had a more comic-accurate version of Cable. And, that's really all we know. However, that's not the last version of Deadpool 2 I want to talk about, as the Deadpool 2 that we got was actually different from the script created after Tim Miller's departure. For example, Black Tom Cassidy was actually going to have a much larger role in the film, where he would be the one responsible for Russell becoming a villain in the future. This entire role was cut out of the film because Fox deemed his powers too expensive to create. Also, Vanessa and Peter's deaths were supposed to be permanent, and this cut of the film even made its way into test screenings. However, it was decided to bring them back via reshoots. Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver were a couple in the MCU. Don't worry, Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver weren't actually a couple in the MCU, as far as we know. If they were, I don't think Wanda is going to tell anyone about that. So why did I begin this entry by saying that they were a couple? Well, have you ever noticed how in Age of Ultron, the pair can be, a bit touchy at times? It's kind of odd. Well, this was done on purpose. Not by the film's director or writer, but by Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor Johnson. It turns out, the two of them actually know about Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver's very close relationship in some comics. So they played into it, with Aaron Taylor Johnson saying, quote, "When you look in the comic books, you see a lot of the time that she's always sort of mothering him. He's like the father figure, and she's like the mother figure. Emotionally, she can stabilize him, and he protects her physically, vice versa." To which Elizabeth Olsen said, quote, "In the comics, every time you see an image of them, they're always holding each other's hand, and looking over each other's shoulder. They're always so close, it's almost uncomfortable. Aaron and I had been playing a little bit with those kinds of images just for ourselves." So while they weren't actually in a relationship in the MCU, it is weird that Elizabeth Olsen and Aaron Taylor Johnson played into it. Original X2. Originally, X2 was going to be a very different film than the one we ended up getting. For starters, there was originally supposed to be a sequence set inside of the Danger Room, but was cut due to budget concerns. Magneto was also going to be a bit of an anti-hero in the film, as he would have been the one to rescue Professor X from Cerebro 2. Jean Grey was also supposed to survive the events of the film, but would be blinded due to a fight with Cyclops. There was also supposed to be a scene where Storm and Nightcrawler would be trapped in illusions created by Jason Stryker, using Cerebro 2. This would lead to Professor X beating Jason in a psychic battle. Jason would then feel remorse for his actions, but then die. And finally, Cyclops was going to have a much bigger role in the film, but most of his scenes were cut. X-Women: The Sinister Virus. X-Women: The Sinister Virus is a cancelled video game that was being developed by Clockwork Tortoise, scheduled to be released in 1996 for the Sega Genesis. The game would have players playing as either Storm, Rogue, or Jean Grey as they travel across the globe in search for a cure to a bioweapon used by Mr. Sinister to weaken male mutants. This game, which was going to be a sequel to 1993's X-Men game and X-Men 2: Clone Wars, didn't actually get too far into development, with only the game's art, music, and basic programming being completed. Despite this, the game was shown off at E3 1996, with it being cancelled in 1997 after being delayed twice. As to why the game was cancelled, it was cancelled because Clockwork Tortoise was shut down. Sadly, there's no way for this game to be found, as John Pedigo, a former Sega of America associate producer who worked with Clockwork Tortoise on the game, has stated that he once owned a prototype of the game. However, the prototype had degraded in the years since its cancellation, becoming unplayable. So it's very likely that other prototype builds have degraded. Novels. Marvel and DC characters are most known for their appearances in comics, cartoons, movies, shows, and games. But they do occasionally make their way into the world of novels. In fact, the X-Men have quite a lot of novels. Yeah, there's the film novelizations, but there's also a ton of original novels, most of them being one-shots not connected to each other, although there are books that are connected to each other. For example, there's the Mutant Empire trilogy of novels, released from May of 1996 to May of 1997, and the Legacy Quest trilogy, released from June 2002 to October of the same year. A lot of these books also serve as crossover stories. For example, the X-Men and the Avengers Gamma Quest trilogy, released from July of 1999 to June of 2000. Probably the strangest book is Star Trek: The Next Generation / X-Men Planet X, released in May of 1998, which was a full-on crossover between Star Trek The Next Generation and the X-Men. Finally, there's also the comic adaptations they've done, like Astonishing X-Men Gifted, released in September of 2012, Days of Future Past, released in May of 2016, and the Dark Phoenix Saga, released in May of 2019. Wolverine and the X-Men Season 2. Wolverine and the X-Men is the shortest-lived X-Men cartoon, but it wasn't planned to be this short. There were actually plans for a full-on second season, and luckily, we actually know quite a bit about it. For example, Colossus would have joined the X-Men as a full-time member, along with Magik, who would have been voiced by Tara Strong. Deadpool, Callisto, Lucid, Feral, John Sublime, Gazer, Cameron Hodge, Annul, Sunfire, and Kimura also would have been introduced into the show. Pyro would have joined the Brotherhood of Mutants, while Apocalypse would lead the Weapon X program. The MRD, Mutants Response Division, would capture Magneto and invade Genosha. And finally, Operation Zero Tolerance would have been approved by Director Kelly. The original New Mutants film. Originally, the New Mutants was supposed to take place in the 1980s to tie in with X-Men Apocalypse. This would explain why Professor X and Storm were going to be in the film, played by their prequel actors. Interestingly, Storm was going to be an antagonist in the film, with her being described as, quote, a sadistic jailer. This didn't get too far into development because of, very obvious reasons. Making one of the most popular X-Men characters into somebody who imprisons teens is probably not the best idea. The original version of the film was also supposed to be a straight-up horror movie. However, Fox requested that director Josh Boone tone down the horror. But funny enough, after the success of It 2017, Fox had the first New Mutants trailer look more like a horror movie, instead of the young adult coming-of-age film with some horror elements that the film actually was. And because of positive reception to this trailer, they announced that the film would be turned into a full-on horror movie with reshoots. However, these reshoots never happened, as the merger with Disney prevented reshoots from happening. Wildside. First appearing in New Mutants issue 86, released in December of 1989, Richard Gill has pretty much no known backstory. All we know about him is that he's a mutant that eventually helped create the terrorist organization, the MLF, Mutant Liberation Front, and while part of the team, he would go on various missions causing chaos. A few times, he and his fellow terrorists would break into prisons and free mutants, usually convincing them to join their cause. Wildside is probably the member of the team that's the most dedicated to the cause, as the MLF has been disbanded and restarted several times, and he's pretty much always on the team. Either he's super into the cause, or he just likes killing people. I say this because it's very clear he enjoys killing people. In fact, I'm pretty sure that is the reason why he keeps rejoining the team. Anyways, Wildside would eventually be captured and experimented on during the Weapon X project, which gave him upgraded mutations. He was then ordered to use his new mutations on Cable. This didn't end well for him, as not only was he defeated, but after he was defeated, Cable began to probe his mind for information on the Weapon X program. This caused mental firewalls uploaded into Wildside's mind to activate, leaving him brain dead, but alive. But he would eventually recover from this traumatic experience, but would get depowered during M-Day. Though he would eventually get his powers back, and go back to doing bad stuff. Although, he would eventually reform and move to Krakoa, even briefly joining forces with the X-Men for a time. And that's where his story ends as of right now. Just kidding, he later joined back with the MLF just because he wanted to kill more people. As for his powers, Wildside has the ability to give people hallucinations. He's also got superhuman agility and reflexes. And his most iconic power is his sharp claws that can easily slice through people. This was the power upgraded by the Weapon X program, giving his claws a bionic upgrade. As for his appearances in other media, Wildside hasn't actually appeared in anything as of right now. Matthew Vaughn's Days of Future Past. Originally, Matthew Vaughn was set to direct Days of Future Past, returning from First Class. Interestingly, Matthew Vaughn's version of Days of Future Past was going to be the third installment of a trilogy of films that began with First Class. The second film would be heavily focused on Wolverine during the 1970s, and we would have actually seen Magneto kill JFK, while Mystique pretends to be JFK with the help of Emma Frost. Although, the plan involving Mystique pretending to be JFK would actually fail, and in response, people would start to hate mutants. But back to Wolverine. He would have been played by a different actor than Hugh Jackman, and would have been fighting in the Vietnam War. Tom Hardy was actually the actor Matthew Vaughn wanted to play Wolverine. Now back to Matthew Vaughn's Days of Future Past. The only things that we do know is that the film would have included characters from both the old films and the new films, and the past part of the film would have taken place in the 1980s instead of the 1970s. The last thing we know about this film is that Tom Hardy Wolverine was going to meet with Hugh Jackman Wolverine. So why didn't Matthew Vaughn's X-Men trilogy happen? Well, when he finished the script for Days of Future Past, he showed it to Fox, and they thought the script was so good, they decided to make it immediately. Deadpool the Animated Series. In May of 2017, it was announced that FXX had ordered an adult animated Deadpool series with Donald Glover and his brother, Stephen Glover, serving as showrunners. Despite developments on the show going well, the series would be announced to be cancelled in March of 2018 due to creative differences. This really ticked off Donald Glover, as in response to this cancellation, he uploaded a 15-page script to his Twitter titled Finale. Despite the title, I don't actually think this was an actual episode of the show, as the script sees Deadpool traveling to Kenya to protect Sudan, the last male northern white rhinoceros. But while doing this, he discovers that his show got cancelled, and begins to theorize various reasons as to why it was cancelled. From Marvel and FX being racist in not wanting a show with an all-black writing staff, to socio-political issues of how Deadpool is a violent, gun-loving white man, to Marvel trying to sell toys to 7-year-olds and 50-year-old, very bad people. In August of 2018, it was revealed that Marvel were actually the ones who cancelled the show, as they didn't want to pursue this version of Deadpool that Donald Glover and his brother wanted to make. FXX had actually wanted the show to continue. As to what the show was going to look like, well, we know that it was going to be fairly gory, and would have had an episode featuring Taylor Swift, which Stephen Glover has actually said might have been the last straw for Marvel. As for the show's tone, Stephen Glover has mentioned that they wanted to give Rick and Morty a run for their money, so I assume it would have had a very similar tone to that show. And that's all we really know about the show right now. There is test footage for the show that exists online, but keep in mind it's just test footage. There's a very good chance that the show would have looked different. Dirtnap. First appearing in Wolverine issue 95, released in September of 1995, Dirtnap is a rat mutant. Well, okay, that's not entirely true. His whole thing is that he can absorb things and take their forms. And after absorbing a literal child, Wolverine tried to kill Dirtnap. In order to escape Wolverine, Dirtnap absorbed a rat and ran off. And for some reason, he really likes this rat form, and pretty much exclusively stays in this form. Although, in all fairness, this was his original form, so yeah, I'd rather be a rat than whatever this is. And so as a rat mutant, Dirtnap would occasionally pop up to defeat Wolverine. Although, since he's a rat, he can't exactly fight Wolverine, or really anyone. So he usually teamed up with villains like the Dark Riders, Chimera, M-Plate, and the Theater of Pain to battle Wolverine, Generation X, and other heroes. Probably the strangest team-up he had was with Scream. Yeah, the symbiote. Although, team-up is a bit of a stretch, as he absorbed her. But Scream and various others were rescued from Dirtnap by Venom. As of right now, Dirtnap is dead. Although, he has died before and come back just fine, so he's probably not dead. As for Dirtnap's powers, well, as I said, he can absorb any living thing and become it. You can tell he absorbed somebody because his victim will have a smiley face on his back. Inhumans vs. X-Men. Releasing from November of 2016 to March of 2017, written by Charles Soule and Jeff Lemire, Inhumans vs. X-Men is exactly what you think it's going to be about. The X-Men and Inhumans battling each other. But why would these two groups of heroes fight? Well, it's because the Inhumans accidentally kickstart the extinction of the mutant population. So there's this stuff called Terrigen Mist. The mist is pretty powerful, as if you're exposed to it, you'll have your DNA altered. This mist is actually the reason why many mutants got their powers back after M-Day. But it's mostly used by Inhumans, as this mist can actually create Inhumans by activating latent Inhuman genes in people. So when Black Bolt released an enormous amount of Terrigen Mist onto the Earth in order to create millions of Inhumans, he, well, created a whole bunch of Inhumans. However, this also had a side effect. As it turns out, if you mix Terrigen Mist with Earth's atmosphere, Terrigen Mist somehow becomes toxic to mutants, and so began the spread of the disease known as Mpox. This disease is pretty fatal, as anyone who gets it slowly dies. So the mutant population of Earth is pretty alarmed by this, and quickly raced to create a cure. While this was happening, the Terrigen Mist turned into two Terrigen clouds that continued to spread the disease. So Emma Frost destroys one of the clouds in order to slow the rate of the disease. But this really ticks off the Inhumans, who consider these newly formed clouds sacred. So Black Bolt murders Cyclops in retaliation. In response to all of this, Beast decides that the mutants should actually just leave Earth. However, the rest of the X-Men and other mutant groups disagree with Beast and declare war on the Inhumans. The fight eventually leads to Iceland, where the X-Men, Inhuman Royal Family, and the New Humans all converge on the Terrigen Cloud. Oh, probably should have mentioned this before. New Humans are the Inhumans that were created by the Terrigen Mist. The X-Men member Forge has a machine that he's using that'll be able to destroy the last Terrigen Cloud. The Inhumans obviously don't want this, and try to stop the machine. But Medusa has a change of heart, and she activates the machine, destroying the Terrigen Cloud. Why did she have a change of heart? Well, it's because she finally found out that the cloud would eventually lead to the deaths of all the mutants. Yeah, nobody had the bright idea to actually tell her that all of mutant kind was going to die if this cloud stayed up. Now that the cloud is destroyed, the conflict ends and mutants are saved. At least that's what should have happened. Emma Frost really wants revenge for Cyclops' death, so she sends Inhuman hunting sentinels after the royal family. So the Inhumans and X-Men have to team up to stop her and the Sentinels. The fight ends with Emma Frost almost being strangled to death by Medusa, only for her to be saved last second. IVX lasted for 7 issues, but had several tie-in comics, like Uncanny X-Men, Deadpool and the Mercs for Money, All New X-Men, etc. This story is often looked at as one of the worst X-Men stories of the 2010s, with many fans thinking that characters were acting out of character, the conflict was extremely forced, and many fans felt this story was simply just another attempt by Marvel to shoehorn in the Inhumans over the X-Men. Oh, and the most controversial parts of this whole story. Yeah, remember when I said that Black Bolt murdered Cyclops? He didn't. Cyclops was killed by the Mpox. Emma Frost just made everyone hallucinate that Black Bolt had killed the Cyclops, creating this conflict because, I don't know, Emma was just doing a bit of trolling, I guess. Andrew Kevin Walker's 1994 X-Men film. In 1994, shortly after buying the rights to the X-Men films, 20th Century Fox brought in Andrew Kevin Walker to write a script for an X-Men film. His film would see the X-Men battling the Brotherhood of Mutants. The X-Men roster consisted of Professor X, Wolverine, Jubilee, Cyclops, Jean Grey, Iceman, Beast, and Angel, while the Brotherhood of Mutants roster consisted of Magneto, Sabretooth, Toad, Blob, and Juggernaut. In the aftermath of a Brotherhood of Mutants attack on New York City, the US government would put in place a new law that would require mutants to register themselves to the government. The X-Men, who are already established at this point, aren't really doing so well. So Xavier decides to bring in some new blood. Wolverine. However, Wolverine refuses to join the X-Men because he's got his own goal in mind, to figure out who he is and where he comes from, as his memories have almost been completely wiped. So instead, Xavier brings in Jubilee, although Wolverine would eventually decide to join the X-Men. While this is all happening, the Brotherhood of Mutants are still running rampant in New York City. But before the X-Men can go off and stop them, they gotta first rescue Beast, who's being hunted down by some Sentinels, led by Henry Gyrich. The X-Men beat Gyrich and his Sentinels, and then head over to New York City for the big battle. The X-Men, of course, win the fight, with Wolverine knocking out Magneto and saying, "You're under arrest." They then take the X-Copter and use it to bring the villains to the authorities. And that's the end of the film. Some other interesting things about the film include the Brotherhood of Mutants being responsible for the Chernobyl disaster, the Sentinels are only 8 feet tall, and Boulevard Trask would have appeared in the film. This script would be rejected by Fox, as apparently it wasn't received very well. Nightcrawler's dad. So Nightcrawler has quite the history with his father, being that his father has actually been retconned. Now, unlike Scarlet Witch and Quicksilver, we actually do know his biological dad, but let's first go over his original dads. First, there's Christian Wagner. Like every single person who's ever been attracted to women, he found Mystique pretty hot. But Mystique didn't really feel the same way about him, but would eventually marry Wagner because he was a German baron, so she would get a whole bunch of money and influence. But as you can probably figure out, Christian Wagner was not Nightcrawler's biological father. Turns out, Mystique actually cheated on him with a man named Azazel, and the two decided to bang in a church, which resulted in Mystique becoming pregnant with Nightcrawler. After finding out that he got Mystique pregnant, Azazel decides to bail, as apparently he was only doing this because he wanted to have a kid, not because he was in love with Mystique. So Mystique lied to Wagner and said that he got her pregnant, though Wagner realized that this kid was probably not his. So when he asked for a blood test to check if he was related to the kid, Mystique simply just murdered him and ran off. Side note, Azazel is actually a demon, or a demon-mutant hybrid, which explains why Nightcrawler looks the way that he does. So Nightcrawler's daddy went from a German baron to a demon. But of course, that's not the end. It turns out that Nightcrawler's actual dad is Mystique. Let me explain. As revealed in the one-shot X-Men Blue Origins, released in November of 2023, turns out Mystique fell in love with a woman named Irene Adler, more commonly known as Destiny, while she was married to Wagner and banging Azazel. And the two wanted to have a kid, so Mystique transformed into a man and banged Destiny. And thus, Nightcrawler was born. As for the stuff with Azazel and Wagner, Mystique was simply just pretending to be pregnant the entire time. Probably the most interesting thing about this twist is that this didn't actually come out of nowhere. This idea was originally thought up by Chris Claremont in the 1970s. Anime. Releasing from January of 2011 to March of the same year, Wolverine the Animated Series is an anime done by Studio Madhouse. The story sees Wolverine traveling to Tokyo after finding out that his girlfriend has been kidnapped by her Yakuza father. While in Japan, Wolverine battles various enemies, like Omega Red, and original villains like Kikyo Mikage and Vidaka. This series would be followed up with another anime titled X-Men. Releasing from April of 2011 to June of the same year, X-Men sees Wolverine, Cyclops, Storm, Beast, and Professor X traveling to Japan to rescue fellow X-Men member Armor, who's been captured by the U-Men. But while in Japan, they discover something crazy. There's a disease going around in Japan causing mutants to undergo second mutations. This is known as Damon Hall Syndrome, so the X-Men have to figure out what's going on, all while battling the Hellfire Club, which consists of Emma Frost, Mastermind, Neron, Sublime, Marsh, and Rat. Although, by the end of the series, Emma Frost would defect and join the X-Men. Probably the craziest thing about this whole series is that they literally adapt the Dark Phoenix saga in one episode. Like, episode 1 has the ending of the Phoenix Saga in it. Now, there were two other Marvel anime released around the same time, Iron Man and Blade. And Wolverine actually makes guest appearances in both of these shows. Wolverine, Cyclops, Professor X, Colossus, Storm, Magneto, Deadpool, Iceman, Beast, Predator X, and Sabretooth would also appear in the Marvel anime Marvel Disc Wars: The Avengers. But this series is set in a different continuity than the other Marvel anime. Jade Dragon, first appearing in Alpha Flight issue 59, released in February of 1988, Daeguan had a pretty rough childhood. Not only was he orphaned at a very young age, but he spent most of his times in Chinese re-education camps, while also being forced to work in iron mines. Life wasn't really going so great. That was, until a mysterious entity known as the Geomancer showed up, where he told Day that the Dragons of Jade lived hidden away in the earth, where they would lend strong warriors their power. Day was then given the Jade Dragon's powers, which turned him into a dragon. Now that he was a literal dragon, Day escaped the Chinese government and declared war on the corrupt regime. Just kidding. During his time in the re-education camps, he had become a Chinese nationalist. With his newfound patriotism, he offered his services to the Chinese government. Well, the next Chinese government. The dudes running the country before were arrested, so in theory, the government was now better. I say in theory because the first thing the government did was order Day, now going by the name Jade Dragon, to take out a temple containing telepathic monks who weren't huge fans of the government. So Jade Dragon just straight up killed most of them, but in doing this, he gained a conscience, and decided to turn on his new bosses. But it turns out the monks weren't alone. They had the former Alpha Flight member Puck living with them. Puck was going through a bit of a spiritual issue at the time, and subconsciously called out to Alpha Flight. So Alpha Flight showed up, and together with Jade Dragon, saved Puck. After this adventure, Jade Dragon went with Alpha Flight back to Canada, only to then be arrested. Turns out, Jade Dragon still considered himself loyal to the Chinese government, despite them ordering him to kill a bunch of monks. Which he did do, but he eventually turned on them. Jade Dragon's kind of an idiot. Believing him to be a defector, because, I mean, who wouldn't, the Chinese government sent out their special forces, China Force, to take care of the issue. Alpha Flight and Jade Dragon would then defeat these agents, but Jade Dragon would then return to China in order to convince his government that he wasn't a traitor. This presumably didn't go well, as the next time Jade Dragon was seen, he was part of the group Three Piece, a Chinese superhero group advocating for the superhuman population of China to be treated better. And that's literally the last time we've ever seen Jade Dragon. He was last seen in X-Force Annual Issue 3, released in August of 1994. So it's been roughly 30 years since his last appearance. As for his powers, he can transform himself into a dragon, which gives him all the powers of a dragon, like the ability to fly, breathe fire, and superhuman strength. As for Jade Dragon's appearances in other media, he's only ever appeared in the film Invincible Iron Man. Holy War? Releasing from May of 2003 to June of the same year, the Holy War arc is a 2-issue story arc that is rather infamous. This is the story where Jubilee and some other mutants, like Magma and Bedlam, get crucified. And in response to seeing his friends being crucified, Nightcrawler makes a joke about himself, calling himself a blueberry muffin. And that's just how the story starts. Also, when Wolverine is told to calm down, he responds by saying, "Calm down my butt." Very strange that they can't say ass, but they can show a bunch of people being crucified. So who did this? This was done by the Church of Humanity, a group that really hates mutants, and really wanted to make Nightcrawler the Pope. Yes, really. The Church of Humanity wanted to make Nightcrawler the Pope so they could then out him as a mutant, and convince people that he was actually a demon. This would apparently destroy the Catholic Church, which would in turn make every Catholic hate mutants. Not only that, but the Church, through Pope Nightcrawler, would create a false rapture using wafers that would disintegrate people who ate them. Nightcrawler and the rest of the X-Men would then arrive at the Church of Humanity's base and, well, defeat them. As for Jubilee and the other mutants, Jubilee would survive, as would Magma, but Bedlam and several others would pass away. Don't worry though, Bedlam and Skin, another mutant who died here, would eventually be brought back to life, continuing to prove that the only Marvel character that can stay dead is Goliath.
We'll be right back.
Today was really cool. We each got a free X-Men toy when Billy's mom bought us Hardy's Fun Meal packs, and she knew all about the X-Men. We either got X-Men mini Marvel comics, or tattoos, or the Beast in his sled, or trading cards, or cool hero caps. So why did Billy's mom know so much about X-Men? Maybe your mom is a mutant. Maybe.
Takes one to know one.
Oh, Mom.
Collect them all at Hardee's now.
Now, back to our program.
Alpha Flight film? In February of 2017, Simon Kinberg revealed that 20th Century Fox was working on an Alpha Flight film set in the X-Men cinematic universe. And, well, that's it. Yeah, this project never got anywhere because of the Disney-Fox merger. we know absolutely nothing about this cancelled film, outside of it being about Alpha Flight. But Alpha Flight wasn't the only film that Kinberg revealed was in development. Exiles film? Yes, in the same interview, Simon Kinberg confirmed that there were plans in place for a film about the Exiles, a group of multiverse-spanning heroes brought together to fix wacky situations. But like the Alpha Flight film, this movie never really got off the ground because of the Disney-Fox merger. We have absolutely no idea what this film would have been about, outside of it being about the Exiles. If I had to speculate, maybe the film would have been kind of like a meta film about the Exiles fixing continuity errors in the X-Men films. Just a thought, I'm just speculating. X-23 film. In the same interview where Simon Kinberg confirmed the Alpha Flight and Exiles films, he also confirmed that Fox was working on a sequel to Logan that would have been about Laura, or X-23. And unlike the Alpha Flight and Exiles films, this film actually had some development done. In October of 2017, James Mangold, the director of The Wolverine and Logan, confirmed that a script was being worked on, and that X-23's creator, Craig Kyle, was going to be involved in the film, writing a treatment for the film. The film's working title was also revealed to be Laura, and it seemed like this film was actually going to get made. But of course, it was cancelled because of the Disney-Fox merger. Thunderbirds scrapped animated death. In X-Men the Animated Series' first episode, a member of the X-Men was killed off, that being Morph. However, it wasn't originally supposed to be Morph who died here. The original plan was that Thunderbird would have been the mutant to die in the opening episode, as a nod to his death in X-Men 95, released in July of 1975. However, this idea was scrapped in favor of Morph being killed, because the team behind the show realized that introducing arguably the most famous Native American Marvel and DC character just to kill him off immediately wasn't the best idea. And in case you're wondering if Thunderbird would have returned to life like how Morph did, we don't know. The original plan for Morph's death was that they were going to never be brought back to life. They were only brought back to life because of fan backlash. So Thunderbird's death was probably meant to be permanent. But if there was fan outcry, then they might have added him back into the show. Generation X pilot. Released in February of 1996, Generation X is the first ever live-action X-Men film. The movie was released exclusively on television, as it was a pilot for a potential live-action X-Men series. Directed by Jack Sholder, Generation X follows a noticeably white Jubilee being recruited into Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters, where she befriends various mutants, like Skin, Mondo, Buff, M, Refrax, Banshee, and Emma Frost. Now, most of those names should sound familiar, but you probably don't know who Buff and Refrax are, and that's because they're original characters made for this pilot. They were originally supposed to be the characters Chamber and Husk. However, because of the film's very notable lack of a budget, they didn't really have the money to adapt these characters, so they were replaced with OCs created by Scott Lobdell, one of the original creators of Generation X in the comics. Anyways, back to the plot. Jubilee and her fellow mutants just kinda chill out for a while. Skin and Jubilee even start messing around with some random dream machine they find. They hang out to the dream dimension for a bit until they come into contact with Russell Tresh, a human scientist who is obsessed with dreams. His mind is stuck in the dream dimension, and obviously he wants out. So Skin decides to help him and frees him. Not a great move though. As it turns out, Tresh wants to experiment on mutants in order to give himself psychic powers. So Generation X has to save Skin from being experimented on, and eventually traps Tresh back into the Dream Dimension. Like with Refrax and Buff, Tresh was an original character created for the pilot. This series would ultimately never be picked up, and so all that remains of this cancelled show is this TV film. As for the reception to this film, fans aren't exactly, well, fans of it. Not only is the whitewashing of Jubilee heavily criticized, but the film's plot, writing, effects, and acting were all heavily criticized and mocked. And because of this, Generation X has fallen into obscurity. Colossus is related to Rasputin. Yeah, it's as simple as that. As revealed in Colossus Bloodline, a miniseries releasing from September 2005 to January of 2006, and written by David Hein, it's revealed that Colossus is actually the great-grandson of Rasputin, a famous real-life Christian mystic and faith healer who was friends with Tsar Nicholas II, the last emperor of the Russian Empire. However, in the Marvel Universe, Rasputin is a lot more than just a Christian mystic with a controversies page on Wikipedia. Turns out, Rasputin was a mutant who had various abilities, such as healing and superhuman strength. But his most powerful ability was his ability to transfer his consciousness into his descendants. The Rasputin would eventually have to kill his descendants in order to keep his consciousness and memories. Also, unlike in real life, Rasputin was resurrected and would join forces with the Shadow Council in order to rule the world. But he would be killed by Agent Venom. The entirety of X-Men Origins Wolverine got leaked. On March 31st, 2009, roughly a month before its United States theatrical release, a work print of X-Men Origins Wolverine was leaked online. A work print is a rough version of a film that's used by the film's editors to, well, do their job. Work prints will also usually have placeholder footage or audio for certain scenes. Anyways, this obviously ticked off 20th Century Fox, who quickly got a hold of the FBI and MPAA. Together, they would eventually track down the original uploader of the leaked version of the film. The original upload was by a man named Gilberto Sanchez. However, he wasn't the original person to leak the film. He was just the first one to upload it online. He bought this work print in an unlicensed DVD for $5 from a Korean man. This led him to being arrested and sentenced to a year in federal prison. So who was this Korean man, and how did he get access to the work print? Well, to this day, we have no idea who this man was. However, according to Ted Gagliano, the president of feature post-production at 20th Century Fox, the leak originated from a preview copy that was being prepared for Rupert Murdoch, the founder of the Fox Corporation. So at the end of the day, how many people actually watched this version of X-Men Origins Wolverine? Well, it's impossible to know the exact number, but as of 2014, Fox estimated that at minimum, 15 million people had downloaded this version of the film. Cyclops convinces some Sentinels to blow up the sun. So this is a quick one. In Uncanny X-Men issue 59, released in June of 1969, while battling some Sentinels, Cyclops is told that the best way to defeat the Sentinels is to use logic. So Cyclops tells the Sentinels, in order to wipe out all of mutant kind, they need to destroy what creates mutants. The Sentinels are puzzled by this, before coming to the conclusion that the sun must be the source of mutants kind, because of the solar radiation it releases. So the Sentinels fly off into space to destroy the sun. but end up getting disintegrated by the sun's heat. X-Men Dark Tide. Released in May of 2006 and directed by William Vaughn, X-Men Dark Tide is an official fan film about the X-Men battling the Brotherhood of Mutants on an oil rig and defending the Dave School from some Sentinels. So what exactly is this film? How is it an official fan film? What's the Dave School? Well, the film was originally created as a fan project produced by the Dave School class of September of 2005. And somehow during production, they received the permission to make the film by Marvel, as not only is their copyright listed in the film's credits, but the film was officially sold as part of a 4-piece Mini-Mates X-Men figure bundle. That's why the characters in the film look the way they do. They're based on Mini-Mates figures. Anyways, as for the Dave School, it's an animation and visual effects school in Orlando, Florida, located in the backlots of Universal Studios. Mammomax. First appearing in X-Men issue 161, released in September of 2004, Maximus Jensen doesn't really have much of a backstory. All we know about the dude is that he was born relatively normal looking before eventually morphing into a strange elephant-human hybrid. And this made him hate humanity. So of course, he joined the Brotherhood of Mutants, where he'd work alongside the team for a little bit. Following M-Day, Maximus, now going by Mammomax, was one of the very few mutants to keep their powers, and was eventually rescued from a group of anti-mutant terrorists by the X-Men. This led to him living in a mutant refugee camp for a while. While in the refugee camp, he witnessed Apocalypse's return in the Blood of Apocalypse storyline, and participated in a riot during the Civil War event, resulting in some Sentinels being used in an attempt at killing him and the other rioting mutants. And he was once again saved by the X-Men. But eventually, the X-Men couldn't be there to save him, as he was eventually captured by the group The Facility, and killed by Predator X. Although, he would eventually be resurrected, and would move to Krakoa, where he would live in peace for quite a while. Eventually, he'd become a full-on hero and join the Dark Riders, a superhero group led by Magik. As for Mammomax's abilities, he's got superhuman strength and durability. His most unique ability is that of his highly corrosive stomach acid, which he could spit out to dissolve things. Cancelled second prequel trilogy. If you look at the mainline X-Men films, it's very clear that there are two distinct trilogies. There's the original trilogy, which consists of the first 3 films, and then there's the prequel trilogy, consisting of First Class, Days of Future Past, and Apocalypse. But that leaves one film by itself, Dark Phoenix. But this wasn't supposed to be the case. As revealed by Simon Kinberg in May of 2016, Dark Phoenix was supposed to be the beginning of a second prequel trilogy. We sadly don't know a ton about this scrapped trilogy of films, outside of the fact that it would have eventually led into a crossover film with the third New Mutants film, and that this trilogy of films would focus on the more cosmic side of the X-Men. The original X-Men Evolution. Originally, X-Men Evolution was going to be a lot different than the show we ended up getting. For example, there were ideas in place for Mystique to be nude throughout the series, much like how she was in the live-action films. But WB Kids weren't exactly super cool with that idea. Spike was also originally named Armadillo, and would have been white instead of black. Also, the main cast of X-Men characters were supposed to have matching outfits, inspired by the classic X-Men uniform from the comics. Nightcrawler and Kitty would also have some weird X masks that didn't really hide their identities. Colossus and Gambit were originally supposed to debut on the show as heroes, instead of members of the Acolytes. This was changed by the creators of the show, as they believed they had too many heroes in the show, and not enough villains. And finally, the show's original title was Children of the Atom. This was changed because WB Kids didn't want the show to have the name Children in the title. Wolverine believes he's a little boy. In Astonishing X-Men issue 15, released in June of 2006, Wolverine and Beast are telepathically attacked by Cassandra Nova. She makes Wolverine and Beast believe that they are their worst fears, which results in Beast becoming a feral monster, and Wolverine believing that he is a literal child. Beast tries to attack him, but Wolverine is able to escape from Beast after a long chase. He eventually goes back to normal a few issues later, after drinking a beer. While he had the mind of a kid, he had to be protected from Beast and the Hellfire Club by Armor, who, wasn't super happy about this situation. Wolverine also refers to Armor speaking Japanese as funny talk. You gotta remember that he was a kid in the 1890s. But yeah, Wolverine believed that he was a kid for like an hour, and some wacky situations came out of that. Scrapped 1980s X-Men film. In 1984, Orion Pictures attempted to create a live-action X-Men film, so they brought in comic book writers Roy Thomas and Jerry Conway to write the film's script. While they would complete a script for the film, development on the movie never went any further, as Orion Pictures began having financial troubles, which eventually led to them entering bankruptcy in December of 1991. The script was shopped around to other companies, but nobody wanted to take it, thus canceling the project. Sadly, we don't know a ton about this scrapped film, as the script has never been released publicly. The only things we know about it are that the film would have been about Professor X creating the X-Men in order to defeat an organization known as Proteus, led by a vampire mutant named Stonewall. The X-Men team would consist of Wolverine, Kitty Pryde, Cyclops, Nightcrawler, Storm, Colossus, and Circe. Oh, and Professor X wouldn't be in a wheelchair in the film, and there was supposed to be a new continent discovered in the film that would have had a bunch of mutants living on it. X-Men Mind Games. X-Men Mind Games is a cancelled X-Men game that was originally supposed to be released exclusively for the Sega 32X. Planned for release in fall of 1995 and developed by Xerox, X-Men Mind Games would have allowed players to play as Wolverine, Rogue, Iceman, and Bishop as they battled bad guys. Yeah, there's not really any story details known about the game. The game was shown off at E3 1995, so it was cancelled fairly late into its development. Or at least one would assume. The only prototype build leaked for the game is far from finished, so it's possible that the game was going to be delayed. We don't know entirely why the game was cancelled, though many speculate it was cancelled because the Sega 32X wasn't exactly a hit. It's also been speculated that when the game was cancelled, assets from the game were moved to the video game The Incredible Hulk: The Pantheon Saga, which was released for the PlayStation 1, DOS, and Sega Saturn. Finally, while the game is known as X-Men Mind Games, it's also known as X-Men 32X, as apparently during production, the game's name was changed to simply X-Men. Mutants are immune to AIDS. In Uncanny X-Men issue 427, released in July of 2003, while donating his blood at a hospital, Archangel mentions to a nurse that mutants can't get AIDS, but they can get the Legacy virus, which, while a completely different condition, does have similar effects. But while many agree that the Legacy virus can be viewed as a stand-in for the disease, it's not, the actual disease. But many have argued that the Legacy virus is actually the reason why this weird lore dump was done in the first place, with the idea that mutants can't get AIDS because they already have their own version of that disease. Albert. First appearing in Wolverine issue 37, released in January of 1991, Albert is a robotic version of Wolverine created by Donald Pierce, as part of a plan to kill Wolverine. Albert was originally never named, and was working alongside a robot named LCD. She was a robot designed to look like a little girl, meant to lure Wolverine in, thinking that he was rescuing her, only for her to then explode. However, LCD gained sentience and didn't want to explode. So in order to make sure she survived, she convinced the Wolverine robot to go all out during his fight with Wolverine. She was able to do this because not only did she give him a name, Albert, but also because she made him realize that he would miss her if she was destroyed. So Albert went all out in his fight against Wolverine. But he failed. But instead of being destroyed, he would hack into some supercomputers in order to create an override code for LCD, making sure that she didn't have to explode. And it was a success. However, this whole incident obviously ticked off Pierce. So after this, the pair didn't work for him anymore, and they went off to live the rest of their robot lives in peace. Just kidding, it's actually kinda sad. Shortly after this, LCD returned to Pierce and asked him to remove the self-destruct device planted inside her. Pierce decided to instead take her apart and sell her parts all across Madripoor. While this was happening, Albert was losing his mind over his missing friend. At one point, even going on a rampage, killing a bunch of forest rangers in Canada. He would eventually discover what happened to her, and would travel to Madripoor to rebuild her. As for Albert's abilities, because he's a robotic clone of Wolverine, he's got most of Wolverine's basic abilities, like superhuman strength, reflexes, senses, agility, and the retractable claws. He's also a bit of a hacker, which is something that can't be said about Wolverine. Star Trek. I briefly mentioned it earlier, but in May of 1998, a novel titled Planet X was released that served as a crossover between the X-Men and Star Trek: The Next Generation. However, this wasn't the first time the X-Men had met Star Trek characters. In fact, it was the third. Released in October of 1996 and written by Scott Lobdell, Star Trek X-Men is a one-shot crossover in which various X-Men members, such as Wolverine, Jean Grey, Storm, Cyclops, and Bishop, meet the crew of the Enterprise, aka the main cast of the original Star Trek series. The meetup gets off on a rocky start, however, as the ship the X-Men are on is destroyed. Luckily, the X-Men are able to transport themselves on board the Enterprise before their ship explodes. Although, the crew of the Enterprise aren't super thrilled by their presence, as Spock defeats Wolverine in a fight. Before any more fights can be had, both parties realize that they gotta work together in order to stop the mutant Proteus. The two teams join as one, as they confront Proteus on a planet that he has altered. But it's not just Proteus they gotta fight. Turns out, Proteus has resurrected Lieutenant Gary Mitchell, a character from Star Trek, who's gone crazy with power. Proteus has also brainwashed the Shi'ar Imperial Guard as henchmen. Luckily, the X-Men and the crew of the Enterprise are able to work together and are able to defeat Proteus, Mitchell, and the Imperial Guards. The X-Men then return home and the day is saved. Then, in May of 1998, Star Trek: The Next Generation / X-Men Second Contact was released. Written by Dan Abnett and Ian Edginton, this time the X-Men meet up with the cast of Star Trek: The Next Generation. This time, the two parties are forced to work together in the 20th century, after the crew of the Enterprise is transported into the Marvel Universe by Kang the Conqueror, who tricks the X-Men and crew of the Enterprise into creating anomalies in the timeline as part of his plan to remake the timelines in every single universe in the multiverse. The Borg from Star Trek also get involved. There's even Borg Sentinel hybrids, which is, pretty neat. But luckily, the X-Men and Star Trek people are able to save the day. Wolverine tried to bang Mary Jane. So in, yet again, another Ultimate Universe controversy, Wolverine tries to bang Mary Jane Watson. This comes from a two-part body swap story from Ultimate Spider-Man issue 66 and issue 67, released in October of 2004. In this story, Spider-Man and Wolverine get their minds swapped, so Wolverine's in Peter's body, and Peter's in Wolverine's body. This leads into some pretty funny moments. However, it also reveals something pretty bad about Wolverine. In the final page of the story, Peter is back in his own body, and when he's talking with MJ, she mentions how she wasn't ready for what he was trying to get her to do earlier in the day, and that she wants to wait until they're a little bit older in order to do it. This obviously is referring to them banging, but Peter wasn't in his body earlier in the day. Wolverine was. And at this time, Mary Jane was like 15 years old, meaning that Wolverine, a grown adult, tried to, with a minor, while he was in the body of a teenager. X-Men: Fear the Beast. Fear the Beast is a cancelled X-Men film pitched by Byron Burden. Burden pitched his idea to John Ottman, who was X-Men Apocalypse's editor and composer. And after reading the script, he was on board with the film, and the two pitched the idea to Fox. But what was this film about? Well, despite the film having X-Men in the name, it wouldn't actually be a mainline entry in the series, but instead would be a spin-off focused on Beast. The film would be set in the late 1980s, shortly after the events of X-Men Apocalypse, with the film's primary setting being a village in northern Canada that's being terrorized by a man named Paul Cartier, a scientist with a similar mutation to Beast's. And he'd gone feral, becoming the monster the Wendigo. While this was all happening, Beast would have problems controlling his mutation back at the X-Mansion. He would slowly start to go feral, requiring him to figure out how to keep his mutation, and more importantly, his mind, under control. Eventually, he would travel to the remote village with Wolverine in order to battle Wendigo. And after Wendigo's defeat, it would be revealed that Mr. Sinister had actually been the one pulling the strings, being somehow responsible for Wendigo going feral. Side note, the group Friends of Humanity would have also been in the film as secondary antagonists. So why was this film cancelled? Well, unlike most of the films mentioned in this video, it wasn't because of the Disney-Fox merger. Instead, it was because, despite being a spin-off film, the movie needed to be given the okay by Simon Kinberg, who was in charge of the X-Men film series at the time. This is because the film would have included Beast, Wolverine, and Professor X, three major characters in the series. Simon Kinberg declined to read the pitch, because at the time, he was writing Dark Phoenix, and didn't want to accidentally be influenced by this script. So X-Men: Fear the Beast never made it past a pitch. The X-Men work with leprechauns. In X-Men issue 103, released November of 1976, the X-Men have traveled to Ireland to hang out at a castle known as Cassidy Keep, that Banshee has just inherited. Although, it turns out this was all a trap set up by Black Tom Cassidy and Juggernaut. So when they arrive, a fight breaks out. Eventually, Nightcrawler is knocked out during the fight, and is then kidnapped by a bunch of leprechauns. But they didn't do this because they wanted to capture Nightcrawler. They actually wanted to help him. They were being held hostage by Black Tom Cassidy in order to force the castle's keeper, Eamon O'Donnell, to work for him. Nightcrawler then works with the Leprechauns to rescue the rest of the X-Men who've been captured by the villains. The fight goes pretty well, as the X-Men are saved and the villains are forced to run off. And that's the end of the story. Leprechauns helped save the X-Men. Although there is one more thing to mention about this story. After the battle, an unnamed leprechaun calls Wolverine Logan. This was actually when Wolverine's name was revealed in the comics. A random leprechaun just reveals it. Wolverine's pretty shocked by this and asks him how does he know his name. But the leprechaun refuses to answer and just says, "We little people know a lot of things." And to this day, nobody knows how the Leprechauns knew Wolverine's name, but that's not the last time the X-Men have worked with this group of Leprechauns. In Uncanny X-Men First Class, issue 8, released in February of 2010, Wolverine, Banshee, Colossus, and Nightcrawler return to Cassidy Keep in order to solve the murder of a leprechaun. They discover that the leprechaun Finan O'Brady, who was the librarian of Cassidy Keep, was killed by a Leprechaun City hybrid. This hybrid, named Declan McGinnis, did this as part of his scheme to gain a bunch of power to control all the spirits in the fairy world, and the leprechauns of Cassidy Keep. He was then confronted by the X-Men, and a fight ensues. But of course, he loses, and is locked away in Leprechaun Jail. Nanny, first appearing in X-Factor issue 30, released in March of 1988, Eleanor Murch was a mutant who took up a job at the Right, an anti-mutant organization designing cyborgs. Upon realizing that her boss and coworkers wanted to kill mutants, she tried to stop them from using her research. But she failed, and was sealed away in an egg-shaped battle suit. This whole experience drove her crazy, and she eventually became a thorn in the X-Men's sides. Not because she wanted to, take over the world or whatever. No, she believed that non-mutant parents of mutant children are evil, or so incompetent that they can't raise a child. So she and her adopted son Orphan Maker began to go around and kill the parents of any mutant kid they could find, and then kidnap said children. The X-Men were obviously not super fond of this, so they fought her a few times. Probably the strangest encounter she had with the X-Men was when she turned a Storm into a kid. But it wasn't just the X-Men she fought against. She's also gone up against Captain America and the Fantastic Four, because Eleanor, now going by the name Nanny, wanted to capture Franklin Richards. Eventually, Nanny and Orphan Maker would kinda reform and move to Krakoa and worked alongside the superhero group the Hellions, though both her and Orphan Maker would be killed in the line of duty, only for them to be revived shortly afterwards, with their powers enhanced. Shortly after this, Orphan Maker would go on a rampage, leading him to be sentenced to exile. This ticked Nanny off, and she threatened to go on a rampage if she wasn't exiled with him. So she was. And as of right now, that's the end of her story. As for Nanny's abilities, she can mind control people using telepathy that she can enhance by using some chemicals. She can also turn adult mutants into children. And as for her egg-shaped battle suit, her suit allows her to fly, fire rockets, teleport, and create repulsor fields. Quest Probe featuring the X-Men. In 1984 and 1985, Adventure International released a trilogy of adventure games to various computer systems. These games were called Quest Probe, and each installment focused on a different Marvel character. The first was about the Hulk, the second was about Spider-Man, and the third was about the Fantastic Four. Well, no, the Fantastic Two, actually. Just Human Torch and the Thing. While there were only 3 games released, there were actually at least 4 more installments being worked on. A solo Human Torch game, a Captain America game, an Iron Man game, and an X-Men game. The game was partially coded, but was never finished, as during the game's development, Adventure International went bankrupt. While the game was never finished, a build of the game has leaked online. This build actually reveals something pretty weird. In this X-Men game, you wouldn't actually play as the X-Men. You would play as Magneto, with Nightcrawler, Beast, Chief Examiner, Professor X, Cyclops, Toad, Mesmero, and Aquarian appearing as supporting characters. X-Babies. First appearing in X-Men Annual Issue 12, released in June of 1998, the X-Babies are a group of children created by Mojo. They're quite literally cloned versions of Wolverine, Rogue, Storm, Nightcrawler, Professor X, Kitty Pryde, Psylocke, Colossus, and Longshot. Except, they're permanently children. Mojo created these guys in the aftermath of the Fall of the Mutants event, the storyline where the X-Men are believed to be dead for quite a while, and now that they're gone, Mojo needed some new entertainment to watch. So he created a bunch of different versions of the X-Men, including the X-Babies. The X-Babies would go on a variety of missions in both the main Marvel Universe and the Mojoverse. From freeing Rita Ricochet from Mojo's wrath, to battling bounty hunters with the X-Men, to battling the Mighty Vengers and the Brotherhood of Mutant Bullies. Yes, baby versions of the Avengers and Brotherhood of Mutants. Honestly, there's not really much to these guys. They haven't actually appeared in a comic in about 8 or so years. Honestly, I'm kinda surprised that Marvel haven't brought these guys back in the 2020s. Since, companies love putting baby versions of characters and things in order to, sell toys or make people go, oh, they're so cute or whatever. Wolverine, Lord of the Vampires. In What If Issue 24, released in February of 1991, a story is told about Wolverine becoming a vampire. During a battle with Dracula, Wolverine becomes a vampire. However, he doesn't fall under Dracula's mind control. Instead, he challenges Dracula for the title of Lord of the Vampires. Dracula agrees to the challenge, and then gets owned, and Wolverine straight up decapitates him. Now the Lord of the Vampires, Wolverine decides, I'm gonna take over the world. So he creates a giant vampire army and declares war on humanity and mutants. And he actually gets pretty far in his quest for global domination, as he's able to kill most of Earth's heroes and villains, and if not kill them, he turns them into vampires. But there was one hero he didn't kill, the Punisher. Now a vampire hunter, the Punisher works with the ghost of Doctor Strange to defeat Wolverine and his vampire army. During the big final battle, Kitty Pryde, who was a vampire at this point, is killed by Punisher, which causes Wolverine to just snap, and actually ends up killing Punisher. However, in doing this, it makes Wolverine realize what he's doing, and he's pretty horrified by what he's become. So he heads over to the Darkhold and recites the spell known as the Montesi Formula. This spell wipes out every single vampire in existence, finally putting an end to Wolverine's vampiric rampage. X-Men Misfits. Releasing in August of 2009 and written by Dave Roman and Raina Telgemeier, X-Men Misfits is a cancelled X-Men manga series about Kitty Pryde attending Xavier's School for Gifted Youngsters. Although, she's the only girl in the school, with the only other women being Jean Grey and Storm. but both of them are teachers. This, combined with the fact that this is a shoujo series, means that a love triangle is present in the story. There's Iceman, who acts cold, but he secretly really likes Kitty. And then there's Pyro, who is really racist towards humans, and he's pretty hot-headed, but he's also very protective of Kitty. Being protective over a minor named Kitty? What is he, a Discord mod? Anyways, Kitty joins the school club, the Hellfire Club, where she meets most of her friends. Yes, the Hellfire Club is an actual club in the school. The Hellfire Club is made up of the richest and most popular boys in the school. But it gets weirder. Magneto works at the school as a physics teacher. The series only had a single volume released, as its second volume was cancelled. Why? Low sales. Despite Misfits making it into the New York Times graphic books bestseller lists, Misfits sales just weren't enough to justify a second installment in the series, at least according to the publisher. Side note, this is what Beast looks like in the story. The Neo. First appearing in X-Men issue 99, released in February of 2000, the Neo were an ancient subspecies of mutant that lived primarily secluded away, waiting for the day for humanity to destroy itself so they can take over the Earth. While there were many different groups of Neo, there weren't actually, like, a ton of Neo. At least compared to, like, humans or mutants or even Inhumans. And honestly, they're not super interesting. They're basically just mutants, but more powerful. They also had extreme egos, believing themselves to be the most powerful beings on the planet. They even had a slur for mutants, Spikes. They were introduced into the comics after the War Clan declared war on the X-Men after a bunch of their members died after the High Evolutionary temporarily shut down the mutant gene. And after this storyline, they didn't really, do all that much. And they can't really do much now because, they're all dead. Yep, the Neo are extinct. Shortly after M-Day, a group of Neo traveled to Utopia in order to find out what exactly happened with M-Day. But they didn't show up to talk. They immediately began threatening the mutants living in Utopia. And because Utopia was protected by the evolutionaries, they just straight up killed every single Neo in the world in a second. Meaning that they're all extinct. Except that might not actually be true. What if I were to tell you that Kitty Pryde is actually a Neo? It was hinted at that Kitty Pryde might actually be a Neo in X-Men Declassified, released in October of 2000. In this story, Wolverine watches a hologram of an event from the past. Kitty Pryde, as an infant, being replaced with a Neo baby. Though this has never actually been followed up on, and the X-Men came to the conclusion that these holograms were lies. And if she was a Neo, the evolutionaries would have, killed her as well. So, yeah, she's probably not a Neo.
We'll be right back.
Strange and powerful forces are attracting people to Pizza Hut. It's the Marvel Comics X-Men video with a mini comic book, pull-out poster, and trading card, all for only $4.99 with any pizza purchase. There are 2 video packs to collect, so hurry and get your claws on them.
Oh, I'll wrap that up.
Exclusively at Pizza Hut.
Now, back to our program.
Ashes of the Apocalypse. In the late 1990s, New Wave Entertainment pitched an X-Men game like no other. This game, titled Ashes of the Apocalypse, would combine first-person action with a strategy game. There would be plenty of first-person action scenes, but there was also going to be the ability to upgrade characters and build structures and weapons. There was also going to be light resource management in the game. Not only that, but there was also going to be a multiplayer mode, where players would battle against each other in either individual scenarios or entire campaigns. You could even play the game in co-op. The game allowed players to play as both the X-Men and the Brotherhood of Mutants, with a pretty sizable roster of playable characters, including Wolverine, Rogue, Cyclops, Storm, Cable, Jean Grey, Gambit, Bishop, Magneto, Sabretooth, Mystique, Havoc, Maggot, Mr. Sinister, and even Apocalypse himself. The game's story would be a sequel to the Age of Apocalypse storyline, with the Age of Apocalypse reality making a return via a dimensional rift. So why was this game cancelled? Well, it wasn't. It was rejected. Yeah, everything that I've just shown you and talked about was simply stuff in the pitch. Marvel never actually signed a contract with New Wave Entertainment, meaning the game was never actually in development. But Marvel was at least somewhat interested in this game, as an ad for the game would appear in Uncanny X-Men issue 350, released in October of 1997. A pitch trailer was created and shown off at Comic-Con in order to see if any investors were interested in funding the project. But I guess nobody was interested, and the game was rejected. Omega Red film? So remember X-Men Fear the Beast? Well, Byron Burden and John Ottman didn't just have one X-Men film pitch. They had two. This second film was meant to be a sequel of sorts to Fear the Beast, and would follow the character Omega Red in the late 1980s, as he gets involved with Mr. Sinister messing around with the X-Men. Unfortunately, we don't really know much more about this film, as only an outline was ever created. Female Banshee. Originally, Sean Cassidy, aka Banshee, was going to be a woman. This is why his superhero name is named after a banshee, a female wailing witch spirit from Irish mythology. Banshee would have been a woman if it wasn't for Stan Lee, who vetoed the idea. For those that don't know, Banshee was originally a villain in the comics when he first showed up, so Stan Lee thought it would be a pretty bad look for the comics if a group filled with a bunch of young men beat up a female villain. That group of young men, of course, being the X-Men, so Banshee was changed to be a guy. Viper called Sabretooth a slur. In Wolverine issue 131, released in September of 1998, Viper remembers a time where Wolverine battled a Sabretooth, and for some reason, she calls him an anti-Semitic slur. After this issue was released, Marvel quickly recalled over 1,000 copies of the comic. The comic would eventually be released again, but this time, instead of the slur, the word was killer. So how did this even happen? Well, one of the comic's writers, Brian K. Vaughan, wrote in the script, "The Assassin's Sabretooth." And for whatever reason, the comic's editor, Mark Powers, crossed out assassin and hand-wrote the word killer. The script was then sent over to the letterer, and they misread the word as, well, the slur. This was because Wolverine issue 131 was already late, so everyone involved with the comic was working pretty fast. And because of that, they made a pretty bad mistake. Phoenix and Dark Phoenix. Originally, Dark Phoenix was supposed to be a two-part film similar to Infinity War and Endgame. The idea was that the first film would be titled Phoenix, and would focus on Jean Grey as the protagonist, showing her being heroic and being epic. only for the sequel to come out called Dark Phoenix, adapting the story from the comics. And the earlier film? God, they really adapted Dark Phoenix twice in the same film series and got the same dude to write both of them, and they both sucked. Anyways, this was scrapped pretty early into the film's development, in favor of doing a new trilogy of films that I talked about earlier. Original Magneto War. The Magneto War storyline lasted from January of 1999 to February of the same year, and was about Magneto declaring war on the United Nations, demanding that mutants be given their own country. However, that wasn't the original idea behind the storyline. The original pitch for the story would have seen Magneto tilting the entire Earth on its axis, which would have created a global ice age. Magneto was also going to trap the X-Men in a mutant concentration camp. He did this as a warning of sorts of what will happen to all of them if humanity isn't stopped. This would actually convince a few of the X-Men to side with Magneto. Also, Storm was going to die during this event, sacrificing her life to end the Ice Age. X-Men the Animated Series vs. Linda. So everyone loves the X-Men the Animated Series theme song. Although, I guess not everyone loves the theme song. In October of 2019, a man named Zoltan Crisco filed a lawsuit against Marvel, Disney, Amazon, Apple, and others. He claimed that the theme song to X-Men the Animated Series was actually plagiarized from the theme song to the Hungarian television series Linda, which aired from 1984 to 1990. Now, Crisco wasn't the one who composed the theme song. He's the manager for the estate of Georg Vukan, a famous Hungarian composer who sadly passed away in August of 2013. Crisco claims the tempo, harmonization, and sounding of the X-Men theme song is identical to Linda's theme song. As of right now, the lawsuit isn't over, so there's no conclusion to the story as of yet. I'll leave a link to the Linda theme in the description below. Check it out, and let me know your thoughts on the situation. Multiple Man film. In November of 2017, it was revealed that a film set to the X-Men cinematic universe focused on Multiple Man was in early stages of development. It was also announced that Alan Heinberg would write the film's script, and James Franco would star as the Multiple Man. However, as you can probably guess, this film was cancelled when the Disney-Fox merger happened. Sadly, we don't know anything else about this film, besides the fact that James Franco would have also served as a co-producer. Kamikaze. First appearing in New Mutants issue 93, released in July of 1990, Haruo Tsuburaya is a Japanese mutant with a very unique ability. Well, not super unique, because he has a brother with the exact same power set as him. Anyways, he could fly super fast, and upon hitting something, he would create an explosion that he was immune to. Think of it like PhD Flopper, but for flying into things. He's mainly known for being a member of the Mutant Liberation Front, and battling the New Mutants and X-Force a few times. And this is why he ends up dying. While attempting to sneak attack Archangel, Archangel spreads his metallic wings and accidentally decapitates Kamikaze. His brother Samurai's still alive though, so the family's not dead yet. In fact, he actually lives in Krakoa now. Interestingly though, early into both of their appearances, some readers believed the two brothers were actually the same character. This is due to the fact that they're introduced in different issues, and Kamikaze originally went by the name Samurai. But it was later revealed that the two are completely different characters. This guy also has a bit of controversy around him. After all, he's a Japanese character created by two white guys whose power is based on kamikaze attacks. Anyways, as for his powers, Kamikaze has that explosive ability, but he can also fly and had superhuman strength and speed. Jubilee is married. No, this isn't some alternate universe. Jubilee in the main Marvel Universe is married. In Jubilee issue 5, released in January of 2005, Jubilee discovers that her favorite clothing store, the Shiny Buckle, is being taken over by aliens. So she battles the aliens and ends up being captured, being brought to the aliens' mothership. There she meets a bunch of alien prisoners and joins forces with them to take down the aliens and save the store. But one of the prisoners, named Thorak, caught her attention, and the two fell in love and got married. However, the marriage wasn't going super well, so they decided to let Jubilee go back to Earth with her memories wiped. Now, I say this is in Jubilee issue 5, but that's not... well, I mean, it's technically true. This is all mentioned in the opening text of issue 5, claiming that this alien adventure happened in issue 4. But that's not true. There's no alien adventure at all in any of the issues in this miniseries. Honestly, it's entirely possible that the story just didn't happen at all. After all, not only do we not see the story, but it's also clearly a joke. With the joke being that because Jubilee's memories were wiped, we don't actually see the story. But if it did, technically, it never says they got divorced, so Jubilee could still be married to an alien named Thorak. Dazzler film. In the mid-1980s, Marvel and Casablanca Records were making plans to make Dazzler a massive household name, introducing her in the comics, giving her an album, and a feature film. Though originally, the film was just going to be a half-hour animated special, but Marvel instead changed it to be a full-on theatrical film. The film's script treatment was created by Jim Shooter. As for the film's cast, Marvel was trying to get Kiss, The Village People, Cher, Donna Summer, Rodney Dangerfield, and Robin Williams to appear in the film as supporting characters, while Bo Derek would star as Dazzler. Bo Derek would agree to the film, but she's actually the reason why the film got cancelled, because she demanded that her husband, John Derek, direct the film, and that scared a bunch of the film's financial backers, as John Derek was infamous for going over budget, and for being behind schedule on projects, so they left. As for the film's plot, it was kind of insane. Rodney Dangerfield was going to play 4 different characters in the film. Robin Williams was going to play the character Tristan, Dazzler's love interest. The Village People would play the Stompers. Donna Summer would play the Queen of Fire, and Kiss would play the Dread Knights. Spider-Man and the Avengers were also going to make guest appearances in the film. The film would have taken place in a dystopian future after the, quote, Great Disaster. 2 witches rule over New York City, and they've captured the Avengers and Spider-Man. Dazzler would just, kind of run around for a while, not really doing all that much in her own movie. That was until the final battle, where she would use her powers to save the day. Also, Rodney Dangerfield wasn't actually playing 4 characters. He would play the Lord of Chaos, who had splitted himself up into 3 forms in order to manipulate people, and by the end of the film, his clones, or avatars or whatever, would merge back into each other to reveal the Lord of Chaos. Professor X MODOK. First appearing in Uncanny X-Force issue 12, released in July of 2011, This alternate universe MODOK is from Earth 295, the Age of Apocalypse universe, and he's pretty strange. He's the clone of Professor X, being cloned from Xavier's brain and being attached to Cerebro. Although, he was quite faulty, as he apparently didn't really have a mind of his own. He just kinda followed orders and stared blankly at people. The only thing he's ever done was be used by X-Force while they were trying to find some life seeds. And that's pretty much it. He's appeared only once in a comic over a decade ago. Hellfire. In October of 2015, it was revealed that a live-action series titled Hellfire was in development, with an early 2017 release date. Patrick McKay and J.D. Payne were confirmed to be writing the pilot, while Evan Katz and Manny Koto would serve as showrunners. However, the show didn't exactly last very long in development, as by July of 2016, the series was cancelled in favor of another X-Men series, The Gifted. We don't know a ton about what Hellfire was going to be about, but we do know that it would have followed an FBI agent attempting to take down Emma Frost and the Hellfire Club in the 1960s. 25 Moments in History. 25 Moments in History is a viral marketing website created to promote Days of Future Past in 2014. It serves as a history of the mutants in the X-Men film series prior to the timeline getting reset in Days of Future Past. 25 Moments in History is notable because it reveals some very interesting things about the X-Men film series timeline. For example, we find out that because Quicksilver won 8 world records in racing, laws began to be put in place to keep mutants out of sporting events. Mad cow disease was accidentally created by governments while they were trying to create a cure for the X gene. The 18 minutes of cut audio from the Watergate tapes was actually because Richard Nixon was in a meeting with Trask over the Sentinel program, and Beast is dragged out of his home by human protesters and beaten to death in the street. And Beast isn't the only death confirmed. Angel is confirmed to have been killed in 2011 during an attack on the X-Mansion. Probably the craziest bit of info revealed in this website, in my opinion, is the fact that in 2010, Trask Industries buys the X-Mansion and turns it into a research facility studying ways to exterminate mutants. Mystique was Sherlock Holmes. No, not in an alternate reality. In the main Marvel Universe, Mystique was Sherlock Holmes. As revealed in Immortal X-Men issue 8, released in November of 2022, in the 1890s, Mystique went by the name Sherlock Holmes, and was solving mysteries in London. She didn't do this alone, however. Destiny was with her the entire time, and the pair would solve a bunch of crimes. For example, they once went up against the original Mr. Sinister, who was killing people in the style of Jack the Ripper. I say original Mr. Sinister because, for those that don't actually know, the Mr. Sinister that everyone knows is actually one of 4 clones of the original. Anyways, while solving mysteries, they befriended Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, who was inspired by their adventures and began writing about their adventures in books, resulting in the Sherlock Holmes character that we all know. Major Deadpool. First appearing in Deadpool Merc with a Mouth issue 7, released in January of 2010, Wade Wilson from Earth 6466 was a very different Deadpool than your standard Merc with a Mouth. Instead of being a fourth wall breaking mercenary, Major Deadpool was, well, a major in S.H.I.E.L.D., and was part of the United States of North America military. Yeah, in this reality, the United States and Canada merged together to form one super country. Anyways, Major Deadpool doesn't actually do all that much in the one issue he appears in. When Deadpool and Headpool travel to his world, he gets into a fight with the main universe Deadpool. While Deadpool doesn't kill him, it would later be revealed that Major Deadpool was killed by the evil Deadpool Corps during the Deadpool kills Deadpool storyline that I talked about way earlier in the video. Major Deadpool is actually a parody of the comic series US War Machine 2.0, a series that I talked about in the Iron Man iceberg. As for Major Deadpool's powers, he actually doesn't seem to have any of Deadpool's abilities. He just seems to be a guy. Who's the little bald dude in the animated series theme song? If you look closely at the X-Men the Animated Series theme song, you'll notice two strange inclusions in the Brotherhood of Mutants roster. First, there's Thunderbird, which doesn't make any sense, because not only is he barely in the show, but he's an X-Men. And then there's this little bald guy in a green outfit. So why were these two in the Brotherhood of Mutants roster? Thunderbird was included because Larry Houston, one of the designers of the opening, wanted to balance out the rosters in the opening, so he took a random character from an early episode of X-Men and just put them in the lineup. As for the bald guy, he was actually an animation mistake. ACOM, the animation studio behind the opening, for some reason added him to the roster, and when asked to remove the character from the opening, ACOM said no. So yeah, this little guy is just a no-name background character. Wolverine becomes the Punisher. In What If Wolverine, released in December of 2005, we're introduced to an alternate universe Wolverine who never actually becomes Wolverine. Instead, he becomes the Punisher in the 1920s, after his friend Gerard is killed in a mob hit ordered by Dog Logan, who in this universe is a crime boss from Chicago named Scarface. But it's not just Gerard who dies. Logan's lover, Silver Fox, and his son are both killed in this hit as well. So Logan travels to Chicago to get revenge, teaming up with an information broker named Matteo DePrigia. Logan eventually finds and confronts Scarface, while Matteo unknowingly plants bombs around the building they're fighting in. And so the bombs go off, Scarface dies, and Logan lives. Logan then tells Matteo that he plans on ending crime in Chicago, and in order for him to do that, he's gonna need some help. And a lot more guns. And that's kind of it. It's a fairly simple what-if story, at least at first glance. Well, I mean, it is a simple story, but the universe it takes place in is far from simple. This all happens on Earth 717, which is home to various different what-if stories, such as the Fantastic Four being parts of the Soviet Union, Captain America serving in the American Civil War and saving Abraham Lincoln's life, and Thor being the Herald of Galactus. Professor X and Mystique were married. In Uncanny X-Men issue 24, released in July of 2014, it's revealed via Professor X's will, yeah, he was dead around this time, that he's married to Mystique. They even had a secret child together. However, by the end of this storyline, a member of the X-Men had to travel back in time in order to defeat the villain Matthew Malloy. And one of the consequences of this time travel was erasing this marriage from existence. Now you're probably wondering, why were they married? Were they in love? Was this a marriage of convenience? No idea. It's literally never brought up again. Even their kid, Charles Xavier II, just vanishes. He's gone. What was the point of all this? iScream, first appearing in Obnoxio the Clown issue 1, released in January of 1983, iScream is a mutant who hated the X-Men. Not because they wronged him in any way, but because they got all the cool powers, while he got a very strange power. iScream could turn his body into ice cream. So iScream felt angry at the fact that he had such a bizarre power. So he decided to take out his anger on the X-Men. So he stormed the X-Mansion on the day of Kitty Pryde's birthday. And by storm, I mean he snuck in. There he decided that he would kill all of the X-Men. And Obnoxio the Clown. For those that don't know, Obnoxio the Clown was the host of the Crazy magazine, which was basically just Diet Mad magazine. He's also weirdly powerful, able to defeat various X-Men members by himself. Anyways, iScream was about to attack the X-Men when Professor X detected him via Cerebro. So he turned the temperature down in the room that iScream was hiding in. This somehow froze iScream, and he was sent to jail. Although, he would reform. He's also seemingly come to terms with his ice cream abilities. He would eventually move to Krakoa and joined an emergency response team. And as part of this team, he creates ice cream for kids in need. Gotta be honest with you, I don't think I would eat ice cream made out of a person. Just, I don't know, call me crazy. iScream probably came to terms with his powers after discovering that there's actually somebody out there with worse powers. Soft Serve. First appearing in Way of X issue 2, Soft Serve's powers are pooping ice cream. No, that's not a joke. She poops ice cream. At least, she originally did. It's been retconned that her body is actually a portal to an ice cream dimension, and that the portal is in her butt, which is why it looks like she's pooping out ice cream. I don't know, man, we're nearly 4 hours into this, what do you want me to say? The Mutant X series? So Mutant X is a very strange show. Airing from October 2001 to May of 2004, and lasting for 66 episodes over the course of 3 seasons, at first glance, you might think that this show is an X-Men series. After all, it's a superhero show about mutants created by Avi Arad. Marvel Studios was even a production company. Marvel even released a tie-in comic called A Mutant X Origin in May of 2002. However, despite all of this, it's not connected to the X-Men at all. It's a completely different show that's not an adaptation of anything. Despite this, Fox decided to sue Marvel in April of 2001, as they claimed they had the exclusive rights to make an X-Men show, and that Mutant X was far too similar to X-Men. Marvel countersued and claimed that Mutant X wasn't similar to the X-Men. The lawsuit eventually ended in May of 2003. At least the Marvel and Fox lawsuit. Fox had actually sued not just Marvel, but Fireworks Entertainment and Tribune Entertainment, 2 more of the show's production companies. This resulted in Tribune suing Marvel for $100 million for fraud and breach of contract, as they claimed they were encouraged by Marvel to connect Mutant X to the X-Men. Not only that, they claimed that Marvel misrepresented what they were getting in their license, and causing millions of dollars in losses due to Tribune Entertainment needing to alter storylines and characters to make sure they weren't connected at all to the X-Men. Eventually, all of these lawsuits would be settled. Wolverine Squad. First appearing in Exiles issue 86, released in August of 2006, The Wolverine Squad is a team of Wolverines from different universes brought together by the Timebreakers, an advanced bug species who often got heroes from other realities to fix their multiverse-damaging shenanigans. The first and only mission the Wolverine Squad went on was to stop the entity known as Brother Mutant from taking over a reality. This guy is literally Wolverine, Magneto, Scarlet Warlock, Quicksilver, and Mesmero, all merged into one entity. So, he's a pretty big deal. And so the Wolverine Squad went to go fight him, and lost, with most of them being defeated. Wolverine of 811, the Days of Future Past reality, was the only one to escape, and returned to the Timebreakers to report their failure. He also convinced them to hire the Exiles to help them defeat Brother Mutant. They agreed, and the Exiles showed up and, with the help of Wolverine, finally defeated Brother Mutant. I guess because their only outing was a failure, the Timebreakers had no interest in ever using the team again, so all surviving Wolverines were sent back to their own realities. The Wolverines that made up the squad were Wolverine of Earth 811, Wolverine from Earth 181, who was still in his patch phase, Wolverine from Earth 6195, one of the many zombie universes, Wolverine from Earth 520, who was still undergoing the Weapon X programming, Albert and LCD from Earth 5211, and Wolverine from Earth 1880, a Wolverine from the 19th century who was just getting his powers for the first time. While this Wolverine squad never saw any more action, there was another Wolverine squad, or Wolverine Army, that appeared in Exiles issue 86, released in September of 2006. They worked for Brother Mutant and fought the Exiles, and the Wolverine squad. Some of the Wolverines in this squad, or army, included Snikt the Clown, who was Wolverine, but a clown, a Hulk Wolverine, the Fiend with no name, and Wolverine, but he was actually the Wendigo, but went by the name Hulk. The Fetus Fight. In New X-Men issue 121, released in January of 2002, Grant Morrison decided to give the world one of the weirdest stories ever told in comics. So, Cassandra Nova is Charles Xavier's twin sister, but she wasn't born normally like Xavier. While inside their mother's womb, Xavier somehow realized that his sister was evil. Like, pure evil. And so Fetus Xavier attacked Fetus Cassandra. They had a fight in their mother's womb. This led to their mother having a miscarriage. Xavier would survive in his mom's womb, while Cassandra would be pronounced as stillborn, and she somehow ends up in the sewers, where she spends decades of her life building a body for herself. But there's more to this. This all happened because Cassandra is Xavier's anti-self, which is a spiritual being that's meant to be the exact opposite of their twin, and they must battle to the death inside the womb to see which one is born. And it turns out, every single sentient life in the universe has one of these, which means that every single character that has ever appeared in Marvel Comics battled their spiritual twin inside their mother's womb. Spider-Man, Hulk, Captain America, Doctor Doom, Thanos, Wolverine, Red Skull, Daredevil, Namor, Black Panther, Ghost Rider, Squirrel Girl even. This is easily the weirdest lore dump that's ever happened in Marvel Comics. Psylocke and Captain Britain. Okay, so this entry technically shouldn't be in this video because this happened to Betsy Braddock before she became Psylocke, back when she was just a Captain Britain character. But I'm never making a Captain Britain iceberg, so I'm including it here. In Captain Britain issue 5, released in May of 1985, an alternate universe Captain Britain showed up, called Captain Britain, spelled just like that. His real name was Byron Braddock, and he was pretty evil, like just one of the most evil people you can think of. And in this issue, he swapped realities with the real Captain Britain, so basically they traded places. And when he saw Betsy Braddock, he was instantly attracted to her, and so he tried to R-word her. Betsy quickly realized that this wasn't her brother, and so, using her mutant's abilities, she literally fried his brain, killing him almost instantly. Not really sure why Marvel wanted to have a story where Betsy's alternate universe brother tries to, you know, her, but, it exists. Pretty weird. Pretty bad. And there we have it, ladies, gentlemen, and MBs out there. The X-Men iceberg is complete. What a long one. This is the longest video I've ever made. There will be longer videos in the future. Unfortunately, I mean, look, between you and me, I'm already looking at the Star Wars Remastered icebergs, like a topic list. And let's just say that that's gonna be a doozy. That's gonna be a doozy. But yeah, that's the X-Men iceberg. I hope you guys enjoyed that one. It was a lot of fun. A lot of fun to go through some X-Men stuff. How were you guys feeling about Deadpool and Wolverine? It's not out yet by the time I'm making this video, releasing it, but it should be out soon. You guys excited? You cautiously optimistic? You dreading it? What are your thoughts? Personally, as somebody who doesn't like Deadpool at all, I'm not super interested in seeing Deadpool, but I am interested in seeing Hugh Jackman as like a more comic accurate Wolverine, I guess you could say, or at least Lee looks more comic accurate, you know. It's always great to see Hugh Jackman Wolverine. And this film is basically going to be like the Avengers Endgame of the Fox universe. So, I mean, that's gotta be neat. That's gotta be neat. I personally, I haven't seen X-Men 97 yet because, probably the biggest shock to, I think, most people would be that, I've only seen a handful of episodes of the original X-Men the animated series. I did not grow up with it. I did watch a lot of the Spider-Man animated series, the 90s one, when I was a kid, but I never grew up with the X-Men one. I've seen a handful of the episodes. I've seen like the first couple, and then like 2 or 3 scattered episodes. But so yeah, I wasn't super interested in X-Men 97 because I didn't grow up with the show. Like, yeah, I like the X-Men characters, but like this is essentially like a season. This is like the next season of the show, basically. And I don't want to like jump straight into a new jump into like season 6, 7, 8 or whatever without watching the previous ones. So, you know, maybe I'll watch the original series before watching 97. Because I mean, I have heard 97 is like a masterpiece. Like, I've heard it's just like it blew everyone's expectations away. Like, so I probably should watch it eventually. But yeah, yeah. What are you guys' thoughts on the iceberg? Did you guys enjoy it? What was your favorite entry? What was probably the weirdest thing? What were your thoughts on all that? And also, I was serious. Leave your comments below about like the whole like Linda theme song situation, like lawsuit, because like I listened to the theme and like it. I'm not saying they plagiarized, but I will say it is very, very similar. Yeah, I don't have much else to say. There will probably be one more superhero iceberg this year. I won't make any promises, but there probably will be. You know, it'll probably be a DC one. Don't expect Captain America or like Hulk or whatever until next year. I'll say that. Or Daredevil for that matter. But yeah, next iceberg will be about Indiana Jones to kind of celebrate the release of The Great Circle. So hope you guys are excited for that. Share this video around if you guys enjoyed it. Probably should have said that early in the video because like 3 people are going to actually get to this part of the video, but whatever. Oh well. Yeah, hope you guys enjoyed. Stay safe and all that, and I will see you all in the next video. Take care. Calm down my butt.